Chapter 27-24, A Gap Beyond Imagination. It's starting. I wonder if Black Flame can snatch that advanced resource node? As I see it, with his mana domain, Black Flame should fear group battles the least. However, Mythology's side isn't filled with pushovers either. The one leading the defense of that advanced resource node is the Silver Ghost, Prosciutto. The legion under him is amazing. I heard they killed a level 110 superior mythic ranked world boss some time ago. The feat sent waves across the entire western continent. Crap. They're that strong? In that case, Black Flame is really in danger. I heard that superior mythics all possess mana domains. Combined with their frightening basic attributes, it shouldn't be possible for players to defeat them. Everyone in the arena paid close attention to Shi Feng's 100-man team. It was no exaggeration to say that nobody present wished to miss out on this earth-shattering battle. Many of the major powers in the VIP viewing rooms had even stopped paying attention to the other battlefields and focused solely on Shi Feng's 100-man team. At this time, as if long prepared for this, Mythology's members summoned a magic barrier as soon as Shi Feng's team arrived. The barrier covered a 500-yard radius, thoroughly enveloping the advanced resource node and Shi Feng's team. Under the magic barrier's oppressive power, not only did everyone on Shi Feng's team feel their bodies growing heavier, but even their basic attributes started falling rapidly. This is an advanced magic barrier? Mushin was shocked when she saw how much her basic attributes had fallen. How is this possible? Advanced magic barriers were incredibly rare in God's domain. Just one set of magic array scrolls for an advanced magic barrier was worth a fortune. However, as the current competition prohibited the use of magic tools, players could only rely on themselves to erect magic barriers. There were strict requirements for players to use magic barriers without any external aid. Just casting an intermediate magic array required 100 players. Moreover, of these 100 players, 20 of them needed to be at the intermediate magician standard and 5 at the advanced magician standard. Otherwise, the magic array wouldn't operate. If intermediate magic arrays had such stringent requirements, one could easily imagine the requirements needed to summon an advanced magic array. Nevertheless, Mythology's team had actually summoned one. This was simply unbelievable. Meanwhile, an advanced magic barrier was capable of suppressing even mythic monsters. Needless to say, it would have a tremendous effect on Tier 3 players. At this time, Frost Heaven's members all wore pale expressions on their faces. They weren't even peak experts in the guild to begin with. Compared to the various superpowers teams, their basic attributes could only be considered average. Now that the magic barrier had reduced their basic attributes by 30%, how were they supposed to fight? So, this is Mythology's foundation? Amazing. With this, even if Black Flame summons his mana domain, he will still have difficulty resisting the magic array's suppression. The audience gasped when they saw Mythology's advanced magic barrier. On a battlefield that prohibited the use of magic tools, having the ability to summon advanced magic barriers would basically make one invincible. Of course, a magic barrier summoned entirely through the effort of players wasn't unbeatable. The greatest flaw of such a magic barrier was the immense burden on the caster's mana. If the players supporting the barrier did not replenish their mana, they wouldn't last more than 10 minutes. However, on this battlefield, 10 minutes were more than enough to decide the outcome. While everyone was marveling at Mythology's capabilities, 100 players walked out of the advanced resource node. The person in the lead was a silver-haired young man with an amiable expression on his face. However, everyone present was aware that this friendly youth was also known as the Silver Ghost, one of the leaders of Mythology's younger generation. Guild leader Black Flame, we meet again, Prosciutto greeted Shi Feng in an indescribably calm voice. He showed no eagerness for a showdown at all. Instead, he behaved as if he was chatting about family affairs. At Prosciutto's words, Mushin looked at Shi Feng in surprise. Prosciutto was a big celebrity in God's domain. He had risen to the position of vice commander in Mythology's trump card legion at a young age and was the designated successor of the legion's monstrous commander. You know him? MHM. We've met once on the western continent. Shi Feng nodded in response to Mushin's curiosity and surprise. There was no point in hiding the matter. After all, he had caused quite a huge scene in the Starlight Fortress, and most of the western continent's superpowers probably knew about his clash with Mythology already. You really are heartless with your words, guild leader Black Flame, Prosciutto sighed. The fight in the Starlight Fortress is the only humiliation I've suffered ever since entering Mythology. My memory of that fight is still fresh, yet you don't take it seriously at all. Humiliation. Smiling, Shi Feng said, That's hyperbole, right? Your Eminence only failed to have your way. No. It is already a humiliation for me, Prosciutto disagreed, shaking his head. Earnestly, he continued, previously I stated that we would meet again. Only our reunion happened much sooner than I expected. Although I still don't think the time is right, allow me to repay some of the humiliation I suffered before. As soon as Prosciutto finished speaking, the 100 Tier 3 experts behind him promptly released their auras. It immediately felt as if a demon god had descended onto the battlefield. Of the group of 100, over 30 peak experts exuded auras rivaling that of mythic monsters. The Frost Heaven members nearly collapsed to the ground under this pressure. This is in advanced combat array. Over 30 peak experts with strength rivaling mythic monsters? No. This must be an illusion. How can there be such a large gap between our guilds? At this time, the Frost Heaven members on Shi Feng's team weren't the only ones suffering a mental breakdown. Even the various major powers in the VIP viewing rooms were dumbfounded, despair flooding their hearts. Sure enough, the gap is much bigger than we thought. Unyielding Heart smiled bitterly as he looked at Mythology's 100-man team. Yes, this was the 5 great super guilds' strength. The world had always regarded the various superpowers' existence as second only to the 5 great super guilds. However, these superpowers all knew full well that aside from a select few super guilds, every other superpower was far behind the 5 great super guilds. It wouldn't even be an exaggeration to say that they were living in 2 different worlds. This was also why no single superpower dared to declare that they would replace the 5 great super guilds. It's over. It's really over now. How can the gap be this massive? Fear bloomed in Mushin's heart as she looked at the approaching 30-plus peak experts. Even her breaths became stifled. She had long since known that mythology wasn't a pushover and that the 5 great super guilds' strength the various superpowers had seen thus far was only the tip of the iceberg. However, she never thought that the reality of the situation would actually be so hopeless and suffocating. Black Flame. Sandstorm grinned smugly as he glared at Shi Feng. You only beat me last time thanks to your mana body. I'll let you know what true strength is this time. If you couldn't do it last time, then I'm afraid you still can't do it this time, Shi Feng retorted, shaking his head as he watched Sandstorm approach. Still acting stubborn even in the face of death? I want to see what other tricks you have up your sleeves this time. After saying so, Sandstorm immediately charged at Shi Feng, his speed as fast as a shooting star. The distance of 100 yards seemed almost non-existent to him. Before Frost Heaven's members could react, Sandstorm was already standing in front of Shi Feng. The dagger he wielded also turned into a phantom snake that bit at Shi Feng's heart. Tricks. Shi Feng shook his head when he saw this scene. He then stretched out his hand. Boom. A violent storm enveloped the entire battlefield, kicking up dust and dirt into the air. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. How is this possible? The next moment, everyone stared at the 2 figures standing amid the dust cloud in stupefaction. At this time, Sandstorm's dagger hovered half an inch away from Shi Feng's heart. Meanwhile, before anyone realized it, Shi Feng had actually caught Sandstorm by the wrist, intercepting the hand holding the dagger. How is this possible? Sandstorm was stunned when he saw his captured wrist. Chapter 27-25, Warm-up over? How did he do it? That other guy's power is comparable to mythic monsters. Yet, Black Flame actually received the attack directly? Black Flame should be under the magic barrier's suppression now, right? So, this is Black Flame's true strength? After a moment of silence, the audience in the arena instantly broke into an uproar, never having expected things to turn around so quickly. When mythology revealed its frightening combat power, almost everyone believed that this fuss caused by Zero Wing and Frost Heaven was over. Yet, it turned out that Zero Wing still had the strength to contend against mythology. How could anyone not entertain expectations in this situation? After all, far too few people in God's domain dared challenge the 5 great super guilds. Regardless of the outcome, after this challenge to mythology in this competition, Black Flame's name would become known to everyone in God's domain. However, unlike the spectating players, the mythology members at the advanced resource node showed no signs of surprise. This was especially true for the 100 players forming the battle array. Sandstorm is too reckless. The vice commander previously warned him that Black Flame isn't a simple opponent, yet he actually charged into battle all by himself without a word. Foolish. He is truly foolish. He actually ignored the vice commander's words. He's going to turn us into a laughing stock for the other superpowers. The 30-plus Void Realm experts from mythology did not feel a shred of pity for Sandstorm, only anger that he had allowed himself to get caught. Their Vice Commander Prosciutto had gone to great lengths to create a scenario presenting mythology as an existence that should never be provoked. Now, Sandstorm had single-handedly ruined this scenario. Sandstorm, come back. Stop shaming yourself in front of Guild Leader Black Flame, Prosciutto said, sighing as he looked at Sandstorm and his dumbfounded expression. At Prosciutto's words, Sandstorm snapped out of his daze, and his expression turned unprecedentedly grim and fearful. His hands even started trembling slightly. No. I can't disappoint the Vice Commander. Die. You must die. Only if you die can I wash away my shame. Sandstorm turned to Shi Feng, a hint of fear and madness in his eyes as he looked at Shi Feng. However, the fear he felt wasn't because of Shi Feng but Prosciutto. Immediately, Shi Feng felt the power resisting his hand strengthening. Before Shi Feng could react, Sandstorm disappeared from where he stood and reappeared in midair with crimson runes covering his body. In addition, Sandstorm's body also underwent several physical changes. Not only did his body enlarge, but 2 black horns also grew out from his forehead. He also gained a pair of pitch-black, feathered wings and a scaly tail. The frightening aura he now exuded had Frost Heaven's Tier 3 experts shuddering involuntarily. What did he do? Doesn't the competition venue prevent the use of berserk skills? A hint of fear appeared in Mushin's eyes as she gazed at Sandstorm hovering in midair. Compared to his previous self, the current Sandstorm was like a completely different person. Not only did his aura intensify, but even his life rating had received a significant improvement. No. It's not a berserk skill. He's just reverting to his original form, Shi Feng said, shaking his head. Even he was a little surprised when he saw Sandstorm's transformation. Mythology truly is amazing. To think they actually managed to get their hands on the demi-dragon bloodline. Someone among them even managed to endure the bloodline's violent power. In God's domain, aside from bloodlines that increased a player's life rating, there were special bloodlines that functioned differently. One such example was the violent demi-dragon bloodline, which could raise a player's life rating to the archaic species standard, granting players a much greater improvement than ordinary bloodlines. However, this bloodline had a drawback. Due to the demi-dragon bloodline's overly violent power, players paid a heavy price to use whenever a player activated their demi-dragon bloodline. They would be subjected to unimaginable pain beyond the tolerance of ordinary humans. Hence, very few people were willing to accept such bloodlines. Shi Feng never thought that Sandstorm would manage to not only assimilate the demi-dragon bloodline but also endure its violent power. You must be crazy. Mushin was exasperated to see Shi Feng marveling at Sandstorm's strength. The strength of his aura has more than doubled. I even suspect he has already reached the Tier 4 standard in terms of the strength attribute. Yet you still have the time to admire his strength? That's right. In terms of physique and basic attributes, he is indeed on par with bona fide Tier 4 classes. Shi Feng nodded in affirmation. Mushin couldn't help goggling at Shi Feng's composure. She simply couldn't understand what was going through his mind. It was as if he had forgotten who had driven Sandstorm to such an extent. Lena, you guys go help him as well. Prosciutto ordered calmly to the blonde, female shield warrior beside him. At this command, the mythology members standing around Prosciutto turned to him in surprise. The blonde girl named Lena was Prosciutto's right-hand man. She was a bona fide domain realm expert, and her strength ranked within the top 3 in this team of theirs. Now, Prosciutto was actually having her join the fight as well. Yes, sir. Lena made a respectful bow before joining Sandstorm together with 5 other players behind her. What's going on? What is Prosciutto thinking? Does he think Sandstorm isn't enough to deal with Black Flame? That's not possible, right? That Sandstorm can be considered a Tier 4 monster already. Maybe the others were told to deal with Frost Heaven's members. At this time, everyone in the audience was eyeing Lena's group curiously. Because of the battle array's buff, the 6 all possess strength and defense close to matching mythic monsters. Any of them could easily annihilate a superpower's 1,000-man team. Having 6 of them move together was simply overkill. Isn't Prosciutto overestimating us? Mushin felt like crying when she saw Lena's group joining the fight. While the fact that Prosciutto had dispatched such a force to deal with them meant that he thought highly of them, she couldn't bring herself to appreciate the gesture. After all, they would have to deal with 4 peak experts with basic attributes close to matching mythic monsters. However, before Mushin and the other Frost Heaven members could prepare themselves, the aura of Lena's group suddenly changed. In the blink of an eye, 6 more demi-dragons appeared hovering in the air. What is Prosciutto trying to do? Crap. 7 bona fide mythic combatants. I must be dreaming. This is the real power of the 5 great super guilds? The various spectating powers and players gasped involuntarily when they saw the 7 demi-dragons in the air. Bastards. Mythology is really a group of bastards. Mythology's 1,000-man team possessed not only over 30 near-mythic combatants but even 7 bona fide mythic combatants. This situation was simply mind-blowing. While the audience was feeling fearful over the absolute power mythology displayed, Lina flew toward Shi Feng and stopped near him. Your Excellency Black Flame, we sincerely apologize for Sandstorm's sudden assault on you, Lina said, her golden eyes carrying great respect as she looked at Shi Feng. According to our vice commanders, let's end the warm-up here and have both sides show our true strength. This is the respect we deserve, right? Sure. You're right. Shi Feng nodded. Shi Feng's words echoed in everyone's mind like a deafening thunder and instantly silenced everyone. What? Warm-up? They were just warming up before? I didn't hear things right? That woman actually told Black Flame that they should stop warming up? I don't believe it. I don't believe it. This is a lie. This must be a lie. The spectating powers and players felt their minds growing silly when they heard the exchange between Lina and Shi Feng. Based on Lina's words, Black Flame had still been holding back thus far, and now she was requesting him to fight with his full strength. Meanwhile, Shi Feng agreed to her request. If what Lina said was true, how much weaker were they in combat power compared to mythology and Black Flame? At this time, Mushin stared at Shi Feng in disbelief. Shi Feng had previously stopped Sandstorm's attack, which carried power at the near-mythic standard, while under an advanced magic barrier suppression. Yet he hadn't used his full strength back then. However, before Frost Heaven's members could react, a surge of mana flooded in from the surrounding environment, with Shi Feng as the center. The ground and sky even shook from the sheer volume of power being gathered. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The magic barrier enveloping Frost Heaven's members also began cracking. Less than a second later. Boom. The advanced magic barrier shattered, transforming into countless particles of light and disappearing simultaneously. A mana domain enveloped the entire advanced resource node, causing everyone present to feel an unprecedented fear and oppression. A domain? Is this really a mana domain? Chapter 27-26, Battle of Monsters with Shi Feng as the center. A dark space with a 1,000-yard radius enveloped the advanced resource node and its surroundings. The mana inside the dark space flowed so rapidly that even ordinary players could sense the flux. The feeling of devastation and oppression this dark space gave off made even the audience in the distant spectator stands fearful. How can such a powerful mana domain exist? Even the mana domain of superior mythics isn't this strong. The advanced magic barrier shattered? Shouldn't mana domains be weaker than magic barriers? Many of the major powers spectating from the VIP viewing rooms had knowledge of mana domains. Some of them had even experienced one before. However, compared to what they had seen and experienced, Shi Feng's mana domain was on a completely different level. So this is his mana domain? Mushin, who stood near Shi Feng, was stunned right now. When she looked at Shi Feng again, she felt as if she was seeing him for the first time. She had heard from Frost Heaven's deceased foreign aide that Shi Feng's mana domain was incredibly powerful. However, the mana domain before her was not just powerful but a whole new ball game altogether. Shi Feng's mana domain had essentially created a world of its own, and within this world he controlled everything. In this space, Tier 3 experts were basically ants in front of Shi Feng. Meanwhile, Sandstorm hovering in midair was dumbfounded when he saw Shi Feng's astonishing mana domain. A player's mana domain can actually be this strong? Sandstorm's heart roiled with doubts as he felt the strong repulsive force coming from all directions. Shi Feng's mana domain was much stronger than that of superior mythics. Even after transforming into his demi-dragon form and gaining a Tier 4 physique and basic attributes, Sandstorm still suffered a significant restriction in his movements. By his estimates, he had lost around 20% of his basic attributes. His reaction speed and movement speed had also fallen by 30%. Now his overall combat power was barely at the Tier 4 standard. Let's get started then. After glancing at Lina and the other demi-dragons, Shi Feng unsheathed the abyssal blade and vanished. Where did he go? Shi Feng's sudden disappearance confused Frost Heaven's members. He disappeared? At this moment, let alone Frost Heaven's members, even the audience in the spectator stands were stunned. A living human had actually disappeared from their godlike perspective. However, before anyone could react, an explosion suddenly sounded in midair. Boom. The next moment, a black shadow crashed into the ground, the impact creating cracks that extended over 20 yards. The frightening shockwave nearly toppled the nearby Frostheaven members. What happened? Everyone gaped in shock when they saw the figure on the ground, their eyes wide with disbelief. Without anyone realizing it, Shi Feng had appeared amid the flock of hovering demi-dragons, fresh blood coating his long sword. Meanwhile, the figure on the ground actually belonged to a demi-dragon. At this moment, not only did this demi-dragon's armor sport a bone-deep cut, but 1/8 of his HP had vanished. The speed of Shi Feng's attack was simply unheard of. However, compared to the audience and Frostheaven members, the mythology members spectating the fight were much more surprised by this situation, especially Sandstorm. A hint of confusion lingered in his eyes as he glared at Shi Feng after transforming into our demi-dragon form. With the combat arrays buff, we wouldn't lose even 3% of our HP after taking a direct hit from a mythic monster. How can Black Flame have such great strength? Fear surfaced in Sandstorm's eyes as he analyzed the situation. As demi-dragons, they could be considered bona fide Tier 4 combatants. Yet, even in such a situation, they still were no match for Shi Feng. Sandstorm simply couldn't fathom how much strength Shi Feng had. As expected of the demi-dragon bloodline combined with an advanced combat array's assistance, it'll be difficult to finish one of them quickly. When Shi Feng looked at the demi-dragon on the ground, he was slightly surprised. Although he didn't use any skills or spells in his attack, he wielded a fragmented legendary weapon and wore several fragmented legendary items. In terms of the strength attribute, he already rivaled superior mythics of the same level. This was why he could slay Tier 3 players effortlessly. However, despite having such basic attributes, he had only managed to take away 1/8 of the demi-dragon's HP with his normal attack. The defense of the demi-dragon he targeted could rival that of superior mythics. Everyone, don't get entangled with him. His attributes and speed are above ours. All we need to do is deplete his stamina and concentration. Lina commanded calmly and without hesitation. Maintain your distances. Jack, prioritize protecting our healers. He definitely won't last long in a protracted battle. Understood. Lina's command boosted the demi-dragon's fighting spirit, and they promptly went into action. With Lina taking the lead, 5 demi-dragons surrounded and attacked Shi Feng. In addition, 1 demi-dragon oracle stood at the rear, casting defensive spells and buff spells one after another, boosting the other demi-dragon's attributes. No longer having to worry about taking damage, the 5 demi-dragons in the vanguard fought Shi Feng desperately, intending to trade blow for blow. Moreover, the 5 of them had excellent coordination, moving as one. For a time, explosions continually shook the earth and sky. Countless afterimages also danced across the sky. The Tier 3 experts in the spectator stands were stupefied. They couldn't tell what was going on at all. They couldn't even tell which afterimage belonged to whom. They only saw some of the brief clashes at best. Of the spectators watching the fight, only those in the VIP viewing rooms could get a clear picture, thanks to the spectator interface's slow-motion mode. The 5 Vanguard demi-dragons perfectly merged their skills, spells and combat techniques. They also had perfect coordination with one another. When one of them exposed a chink in their defense from clashing with Shi Feng, the others would immediately attack, preventing him from landing a fatal blow. As the clash continued, the expressions of Mushin and the other Frostheaven members also grew darker. Although the two sides seemed evenly matched, Shi Feng had to deal with the 7 demi-dragons back and forth offensive all by himself. He had no time to rest at all. His stamina and concentration consumption were far greater than mythology's 7 demi-dragons. At this rate, Shi Feng would run out of stamina and concentration before Lina and the others did. Black Flame, you will lose for sure this time. While we aren't a match for you by ourselves, how long can you possibly last against our joint assault? Sandstorm grew increasingly excited as the fight went on. Although he had suffered plenty of attacks from Shi Feng and lost a lot of HP, he continuously received healing from the rear-line healers. Hence, he quickly recovered the HP he lost. Black Flame, you can't blame us for bullying you with numbers. It's your fault for not having anyone capable of backing you up, the tall man beside Sandstorm said, laughing. At these words, Frostheaven's members lowered their heads in shame. Against such strength, Tier 3 experts like themselves were nothing but jokes. They wouldn't even qualify to be distractions. After all, they couldn't keep up with these people's speeds. It seems this is Zero Wing's limit. However, it's already plenty amazing that Black Flame managed to last this long. It's a pity there aren't any capable combatants among Frost Heaven's members. Otherwise they could have put up a fight against mythology. Many of the spectating major powers couldn't help pitying Shi Feng. He clearly possessed inhuman strength that even mythology had to be wary of. Unfortunately, the gap between the 5 great super guilds and the other superpowers was simply too massive. Even if all of Frost Heaven's participants were there right now, they still wouldn't be able to threaten Lena's group of 7. However, this is a valiant defeat for Black Flame. He can actually hold his ground against 7 Tier 4 monsters simultaneously. He deserves his title of Sword King. Sword King? As I see it, he's strong enough to rank within the top 6 of the God's Domain experts list. Only the 5 great super guilds' old monsters can fight him. Many of the Tier 3 experts spectating the fight admired Shi Feng. Those that previously held doubts about his title of Sword King also stopped doubting him. The seconds and minutes flew by. While everyone was feeling unreconciled for Shi Feng, the man himself suddenly leaped backward, distancing himself from the 5 vanguard demi-dragons. Don't even think of escaping us. We have wings. We are by no means slower than you when it comes to flying. Upon seeing Shi Feng pulling away, Sandstorm immediately accelerated, chasing after him. When players gained a mana domain, they became capable of flight. However, flight achieved through this method was significantly slower than flying mounts. In comparison, demi-dragons could fly nearly as fast as flying mounts. Escape. Shaking his head, Shi Feng said, I just thought that time is almost up, so I plan to end this battle. You're still arrogant even in the face of death. I want to see how exactly you're going to end this battle. Sandstorm sped up at Shi Feng's words. Time is almost up? Lena felt that something was amiss when she saw Shi Feng's calm expression. What does he mean? However, before Lena could ponder on the matter, Shi Feng sheathed the abyssal blade. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You said before that I shouldn't blame you for bullying using numbers. I very much agree with this point. Gazing at Sandstorm and the other demi-dragons, Shi Feng unsheathed the other longsword hung by his waist and said, Now you shouldn't blame me either for bullying with numbers. After Shi Feng finished speaking, the twilight blade in his hand suddenly shone brightly, illuminating a radius of several thousand yards. Twilight's shadow. Twilight of the gods. The next moment, 8 physical phantoms split out from Shi Feng's body, every phantom identical to him. Chapter 27:27, Sword Emperor. When the 8 copies of Shi Feng appeared above the battlefield, the audience momentarily fell silent. Doppelgangers? Crap. Something like this is possible? The spectators' hearts were filled with an indescribable sense of shock as they looked at the 9 Shi Fengs in the air. If anyone else had summoned doppelgangers, they wouldn't have thought much of it. However, Shi Feng was someone capable of single-handedly going up against 7 bona fide mythic combatants with Void Realm combat standards. Now that Shi Feng had summoned 8 doppelgangers of himself. Meanwhile, Lena and the other demi-dragons turned pale when they saw the 9 Shi Fengs before them, their hearts plunging to the very bottom of the abyss. They had to give it their all just to deal with 1 Shi Feng. Now that 8 more had appeared, even if these doppelgangers had significantly weaker basic attributes, the demi-dragons would still suffer tremendously. Let's start the second round then, Shi Feng said, a faint smile appearing on his face as he looked at Lena's group. The next moment, Shi Feng's 8 doppelgangers split up and charged at the 7 demi-dragons, their speed hardly any slower than Shi Feng's. It's just a doppelganger. Do you think you can scare me with it? Sandstorm stabbed his dagger at the doppelganger approaching him, the weapon instantly transforming into a dozen shadow snakes. Advanced combat technique, rampant bites. Seeing the approaching shadow snakes, the doppelganger brandished its sword. 6 extreme slashes. The next moment, 6 sword lights tore through space, shattering the shadow snakes. One of the sword lights even bypassed the shadow snakes and landed on Sandstorm's shoulder. After the sword light passed through, a bone-deep cut appeared on Sandstorm's shoulder. The assassin's body shot backward like a meteor and smashed into the ground. As for his HP, it had fallen by over 1/8 of its total. Aside from Sandstorm, the other demi-dragons were also sent smashing into the ground by Shi Feng's doppelgangers and suffered heavy injuries. They were utterly incapable of resisting the doppelgangers at all, and they could only watch as their HPs continuously decreased. Out of the 7 demi-dragons, only Lena, who had activated a Tier 3 life-saving skill and reduced the damage she sustained by half, was in a better condition. However, as she had to cope with 2 of Shi Feng's doppelgangers, her HP still decreased steadily. It was only a matter of time before she got killed. Those doppelgangers are so strong. Aren't those doppelgangers a little too much? I get the feeling that just one of Black Flame's doppelgangers is more than enough to kill a mythic monster already. The audience in the spectator stands couldn't believe their eyes when they saw Shi Feng's doppelgangers suppressing Lina's group. Everyone present had seen doppelgangers before. However, this was the first time they had seen a player's doppelganger capable of suppressing Tier 4 combatants. No wonder. So, this is why Black Flame is confident in provoking mythology. Unyielding Heart felt endless admiration for Shi Feng when he saw Lina's group getting beaten up. It had been a long time since anyone had dared challenge the 5 great super guilds in the virtual gaming industry. Now, not only did Shi Feng possess the combat power to overwhelm 7 Tier 4 combatants, but it was also almost certain he would be able to capture mythology's advanced resource node. On the battlefield, Lina and the other demi-dragons saw their HPs fall below the critical level. With only 3 or 4 more exchanges, they would fall to Shi Feng's doppelgangers. However, before the battle could continue, several dazzling sword lights struck at the doppelgangers. Boom, boom, boom. Shi Feng's doppelgangers hurriedly defended against the attacks, the collisions resulting in explosions that created massive spatial rifts. Vice Commander? Lina and the others were ecstatic when they saw the origin of the sword lights. The person that just took action was none other than Prosciutto, the Vice Commander of Mythology's trump card Legion. However, Prosciutto's appearance had already undergone a drastic change at this time. Runes had appeared all over his pitch-black armor, and complex magic arrays covered his forehead and eyes. He also exuded a majestic aura reminiscent of a demon god. Even Shi Feng's mana domain couldn't suppress him. A bronze combat array? Shi Feng's eyes were blank with surprise as he looked at Prosciutto's transformation. However, he soon shook his head in denial. No. A bronze combat array shouldn't be something Tier 3 players can activate. Moreover, it's impossible for bronze combat arrays to make an appearance at this stage of the game. Before Shi Feng could analyze the situation in detail, Prosciutto raised the purple greatsword he wielded and instantly appeared before him. The aura he exuded could make even mythic monsters fearful. No. Impossible. Is he really a Tier 3 player? His aura is stronger than even that of superior mythics. Everyone spectating the fight gasped spontaneously at Prosciutto's astonishing transformation. Mushin, who stood on the battlefield, couldn't help staring at Prosciutto in horror and surprise. She couldn't bring herself to believe this was true. Previously, Lina and the others had already displayed monstrous strength. Mushin never imagined that Prosciutto would be even more monstrous. At this time, Prosciutto could no longer be considered a Tier 3 player. He looked more like a dragon wearing human skin. The terrifying aura he exuded caused the Tier 3 experts present to stumble backward, none of them daring to meet his gaze. The only time Mushin had felt such a terrifying aura was when she faced a Tier 4 dragon. Guild leader Black Flame, you have truly surprised me, Prosciutto said as he observed Shi Feng, his voice full of fighting spirit. You are the first person to have forced me to use this form. As a token of my gratitude, I will be your next opponent. As soon as Prosciutto said so, the audience in the spectator stands cheered inwardly. Crap. Are you kidding me? Even Prosciutto intends to take action? A fight between the formidable Prosciutto and Unfathomable Black Flame. This will definitely be the apex fight of God's domain. It's more than just an apex fight. Look how the initial clash between the two already shattered the sky. If the two really fight each other, the entire island might get destroyed. Monsters. These two are real monsters. Just getting the chance to spectate a fight between them is well worth the ticket price. At this time, besides the players on the spectator stands, the various major powers in the VIP viewing rooms were also greatly shocked by Prosciutto's declaration. They immediately had all their members focus their attention on Prosciutto and Shi Feng, as well as record the two's battle. After all, it was normally impossible to collect such information in the outside world. Only in this competition venue would they have the chance to do so. However, after hearing Prosciutto's declaration, Shi Feng abruptly turned away. Are you two not going to come together? Shi Feng asked loudly as he looked at the empty sky. Shi Feng's words confused everyone present. Is he talking to himself? Is there something in the sky? Impossible. My screen isn't showing anything there. Black Flame must have seen wrong. However, before anyone could dismiss their doubts, a deep voice suddenly came from the void and echoed throughout the sky. Amazing. As expected of the person Prosciutto and Cold Shadow are interested in. The next moment, a black shadow gradually appeared in the air. When this black shadow revealed itself, everyone saw that it was a white-cloaked man of indiscernible age. Moreover, despite the man clearly standing in midair, it was as if no one could perceive his existence in their mind. Everyone looking at him ignored his existence automatically. Crap. Isn't he that existence from mythology? Insane. This is insane. Mythology actually let this person join the competition? Is mythology trying to secure the championship? The players in the spectator stands were unfamiliar with this white-cloaked man. On the other hand, a wave of exclamations swept through the VIP viewing rooms when they saw him. After all, this white-cloaked man was one of the terrifying existences in mythology who had reached the higher domain realm. Nobody knew his true age. The only thing others knew was that this man, called Odin, was one of mythology's 3 grand elders. Even mythology's guild leader had to obey his words. Sir, why are you here? Prosciutto put on an indescribably respectful expression the moment he saw the white-cloaked man. It was as if he had just seen a real god. I only came here to deal with some matters, but it seems that won't be possible now, Odin said before glancing at Shi Feng. He then continued calmly, pack up. We're abandoning this advanced resource node. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You were abandoning it? Prosciutto was stunned. But why? This was the perfect chance for him to eliminate Shi Feng. How could he possibly be willing to give up at a time like this? At this moment, let alone Prosciutto, everyone spectating the battle was dumbfounded. Since when was mythology so generous? Because, taking another glance at Shi Feng, Odin chuckled. He is already a Tier 4 Sword Emperor. Chapter 27-28, Sword Emperors Might, a Sword Emperor? Prosciutto was stunned when he heard Odin's words, his eyes doubtful as he looked at Shi Feng. Although some experts in God's domain had already reached level 120, reaching level 120 and getting promoted to Tier 4 were 2 entirely different matters. Reaching level 120 only meant that a player had met the most basic of requirements for the Tier 4 promotion. According to the various guilds' understanding, players would need to search for their Tier 4 legacy lands after reaching level 120, a truly challenging task. Even the 5 great super guilds would need a lot of time to search for just one legacy land. Not to mention, players would then have to challenge this legacy land to obtain their legacy. Meanwhile, Shi Feng was merely the guild leader of a pseudo-superpower. How could he possibly locate a legacy land faster than the various super guilds? A Tier 4 Sword Emperor? No way. It's only recently that some people have reached level 120, yet he's already gotten promoted to Tier 4 Sword Emperor? This is a lie. This must be a lie. That's a Tier 4 class we are talking about. Even the kings of the various kingdoms fear a Tier 4 existence. How can anyone possibly get promoted to Tier 4 so soon? The spectating players had likewise heard Odin's words, and a wave of commotion immediately spread among them, everyone expressing their doubts about Shi Feng's successful promotion to Tier 4. Although Shi Feng had indeed displayed frightening combat power, they still found it possible for a Tier 3 player to do so. After all, many treasures in God's domain could allow players to become incredibly strong. Lena's group of 7 was a perfect example. However, reaching Tier 4 was a different story. Tier 4 existences were powerhouses publicly acknowledged by the NPCs in God's domain. Take the current Tier 4 NPCs for example. No superpower dare defend Tier 4 NPCs. The 5 great super guilds were no exception. This was because Tier 4 was a taboo that had been deeply engraved in the bones of God's domain's players. Tier 4 NPCs were existences that shouldn't be offended under any circumstances. In fact, the various major powers suspected that even the superpowers Tier 3 experts would have to wait until around level 130 to get promoted to Tier 4. On the battlefield, Mushin stared at Shi Feng in shock and expectation. This is true. When Mushin considered the possibility that Shi Feng was a Tier 4 Sword Emperor, a passionate flame burned in her heart. If Odin's words were true, then Frost Heaven's position on Island number 3 was secured. This also meant that Frost Heaven would have a chance of securing the 6th reserve seat and becoming one of the true giants in God's domain. Simultaneously, however, Mushin also couldn't help feeling dubious. While players like herself were still agonizing over unlocking their mana bodies and thinking about how to search for their legacies after reaching level 120, Shi Feng had already completed all these tasks and even reached Tier 4. No matter how she thought about it, this situation was simply implausible. Are you really a Sword Emperor? Prosciutto couldn't help asking Shi Feng. Although Odin had already spoken, Prosciutto still wished to verify this matter with Shi Feng. Immediately, everyone in the arena focused on Shi Feng, wanting to hear the truth from his mouth. That's right. I am indeed a Tier 4 Sword Emperor. Shi Feng nodded. At the same time he glanced reflexively at Odin, his eyes full of surprise. If a player did not register themselves at the Adventurers Association and redeem their Tier 4 class emblem, it should be impossible for others to notice their identity. This was especially true if the player in question had hidden their aura and concealed their identity using special tools. In Shi Feng's opinion, he had concealed his promotion very thoroughly all this time. When he fought earlier, he even limited himself to low-tier skills and spells. He also had the Nightwalker's cape to conceal his life aura. As for his mana domain, that couldn't be used to prove anything. The mana domain's acquisition and strengthening mainly depended on a player's control over mana. The better one's mana control, the stronger the mana domain they could summon. It was unrelated to one's tier at all. Meanwhile, following Shi Feng's acknowledgement, silence spread across the entire arena. At this stage of the game where even Tier 3 players were rare, a Tier 4 player had actually come into existence. It was as if Shi Feng was making a joke of all their efforts. No. That's impossible. I won't acknowledge it. Sandstorm's eyes turned bloodshot as he glared at Shi Feng. How can you possibly have reached Tier 4 already? You must be lying. You're trying to fool us into giving you this resource node without a fight. I won't let you succeed. I will expose you. At this point, Sandstorm had already thoroughly lost his mind. Sandstorm had thought that he had grown a lot stronger since his last defeat at Shi Feng's hands and anticipated that the gap between them had shrunk significantly already. Now he was being told that not only did the gap not shrink in the slightest, but it had even widened instead. In Sandstorm's opinion, Shi Feng was merely the guild leader of a small guild. How could Shi Feng possibly surpass him, who was an elite among elites even in the 5 great super guilds? The next moment, Sandstorm's aura burgeoned in intensity, and the size of his body increased by a large margin. Scales also started growing on his face and body. Now he practically looked like a miniature infant dragon. Flapping his powerful wings, Sandstorm swept up a gale and instantly arrived before Shi Feng. Abandoning his weapon, he swiped a claw at Shi Feng. The instant Sandstorm's claw moved, the space around it shattered. Even the flow of time in the vicinity slowed. The power of his attack approached the standard of mythic-ranked archaic species. Why bother? Shi Feng couldn't help sympathizing with Sandstorm when he saw the latter's frenzied assault. After all, he had once fallen into such despair himself. This was especially true after he saw those geniuses who joined the game much later than he did. However, he had long since moved on from this despair. He realized that all he needed to do was live his life well. What was the point of comparing himself with others? Cool your head first, Shi Feng said, waving his hand. A ripple of mana then spread out from under his feet and instantly enveloped a 500-yard radius. Tier 4 legacy skill, Blade Domain. A magic sword suddenly appeared before Sandstorm, who was only half a yard away from Shi Feng. The magic sword then struck the assassin like a streak of lightning. Being lar. The next moment, an arm flew into the air. In the face of this magic sword, even the sturdy dragon scales were no different from a piece of flimsy paper. Upon seeing his arm flying away, Sandstorm instantly sobered up. He hurriedly activated a Tier 3 defensive skill, increasing his defense by a significant margin and doubling his maximum HP. However, no sooner had Sandstorm used his skill than 7 more magic swords appeared in the air. They then transformed into streaks of light that cut him. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Each plundered 20% of Sandstorm's HP, the 7 swords instantly robbing the assassin of all his HP. The swords also burned his body into ashes, eliminating him from the arena. The entire process might seem long and arduous, but it had taken only an instant in reality. How is this possible? The audience and the spectator stands gaped in shock at this scene. Their minds even froze momentarily. Sandstorm was a demi-dragon that rivaled Tier 4 archaic species in strength. Previously he still managed to exchange multiple blows with Shi Feng. Yet now Shi Feng had instantly executed him without even giving him a chance to resist. Chapter 27-29, Shi Feng and Odin, One Move. The gap between Tier 3 and Tier 4 is actually this massive? When the various major powers experts in the VIP viewing rooms saw Shi Feng slay Sandstorm, they gasped involuntarily. Although they had long since known that Tier 4 was the milestone separating the strong from the weak in God's domain, they never expected the gap between Tier 3 and Tier 4 players to be so massive. Just a moment ago, Although Lina and the other demi-dragons were struggling with Shi Feng's attacks, they at least possessed the strength to put up a fight. However, as soon as Shi Feng stopped holding back, "That bastard! He was actually toying with us all this time." A tall demi-dragon man cursed as he glared at Shi Feng in anger and frustration. "No, that probably isn't the case," Lina said, shaking her head. "What do you mean? He wasn't toying with us?" the tall man asked strangely. "This is only my guess, but," peeking at Shi Feng, Lina continued quietly, "he might have been on his guard against Sir Odin since the start of the battle." He was wary of Sir Odin? Realization dawned on the other demi-dragons when they heard Lina's conjecture. Odin was an elusive existence in mythology. If he hadn't taken the initiative to appear, none of them would have noticed his presence. Only after Shi Feng exposed him did Odin reveal himself. The tall man and the others shuddered. If what Lina said really was true, then Shi Feng was much more terrifying than they had thought. Meanwhile, after killing Sandstorm, Shi Feng turned to look at Odin in the distance. From the moment he arrived before the advanced resource node, he had sensed a vague killing intent directed at him. If not for him having reached Tier 4 already and received a qualitative improvement to his physique and concentration, he wouldn't have noticed this killing intent at all. Due to this threat, he had held back his strength. Even when clashing with Lina's group, he refrained from using his full strength, all so he could respond when the owner of this hidden killing intent took action. However, the moment Sandstorm went crazy and lashed out, Odin had also thoroughly displayed his killing intent. Truthfully, even Shi Feng had to be wary of Odin. In his previous life, everyone had heard of Odin's name. Not only was Odin an invincible existence even among Tier 6 god-ranked experts, but fighting enemies of a higher tier was also commonplace for him. In the past, Odin had fought against a Tier 5 NPC while he was still Tier 4. In the end, their battle had not only ended in a draw but even leveled an entire NPC city. This was despite the gap between Tier 4 and Tier 5 being even greater than the one between Tier 3 and Tier 4. Hence, Shi Feng had no choice but to activate Blade Domain as a precaution. The reason Tier 4 classes were feared by players and recognized as powerhouses in God's domain wasn't just their extraordinary physiques and frightening control over mana. Instead, a larger part was due to the Tier 4 skills and spells they wielded. In God's domain, there was a qualitative difference between Tier 3 and Tier 4 skills. This was because Tier 4 skills mainly relied on mana in the natural world to activate. In comparison, Tier 3 skills relied on the user's mana to activate. Due to this difference, the power levels of the two were worlds apart. With the aid of Tier 4 skills and spells, Shi Feng dared to fight against even true Tier 3 infant dragons, let alone kill a demi-dragon like Sandstorm. However, to Shi Feng's surprise, Odin never actually took action. He only used his killing intent to create an illusion of wanting to take action. Youngsters nowadays really are getting better and better. A smile appeared under Odin's hood. The man then looked at Prosciutto and said, "Let's go." "Yes, sir." Prosciutto no longer hesitated this time. However, when he walked past Shi Feng, he also gave the latter a glance. Although he didn't say anything, the intention his eyes conveyed was obvious. "We will meet again." Afterward, Prosciutto and the rest of Mythology's 1,000-man team left the advanced resource node. They gave up the resource node very decisively and departed for another resource node together with Odin. They left. They left just like that? That Odin actually didn't take action? The audience was stunned by this situation. The originally heaven-defying battle had actually ended in such a manner. Moreover, Mythology's members had given up the fight so decisively. This was completely different from how the 5 great super guilds operated normally. At this moment, even Mushin was taken aback by this situation. "Is this our victory?" Mushin couldn't help asking Shi Feng. Odin's name was synonymous with destruction to the various superpowers. Now that Mythology had mobilized even Odin, she found it truly inconceivable that Mythology would give up just because of one Tier 4 player. After all, while a Tier 4 existence was an invincible enemy for the various superpowers, that might not necessarily be the case for the 5 great super guilds. "I guess so." Shi Feng nodded while looking at Odin's departing figure. Odin's decisiveness had caught even Shi Feng off guard. Initially, Shi Feng had already braced himself to fight for his life. He had even resolved to use some of the trump cards he had kept hidden all this time. However, he now felt as if he had just punched at empty air. "Do we still take control of this resource node?" Mushin asked. "Of course," Shi Feng answered decisively. "We went through great difficulties to win it." "Okay. I'll have the others set up a perimeter now." Upon hearing Shi Feng's answer, Mushin immediately had her subordinates take up stations around the resource node to prevent others from stealing it. After leaving the resource node, Prosciutto couldn't help turning to Odin in confusion. Sir Odin, since we surrendered the resource node to Black Flame so easily this time, I'm afraid the other 4 guilds will most likely ridicule us. Some superpowers might even start to make light of us because of this. Are we really not going to do anything? Prosciutto asked. In Prosciutto's opinion, even if Shi Feng was a tier 4 player, their team still had a fighting chance, especially since Odin was present. It wouldn't even be strange if they managed to take down Shi Feng. Yet, Odin had unexpectedly given away the resource node without a fight. Now isn't the time to fight, Odin replied, shaking his head. Moreover, we know too little about Zero Wing. It isn't the time to fight? Prosciutto grew even more confused at Odin's words. Why? With mythology strength, they wouldn't fear fighting the 4 other super guilds, much less Zero Wing. In fact, he was confident mythology could triumph over any of the other 4 guilds. Now, they were actually retreating because of Zero Wing. When news of this matter spread, mythology would most likely become the various superpowers' laughing stock. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Take a look at these. Odin did not grow angry over Prosciutto's doubts. Instead, he forwarded a few videos to Prosciutto before saying, "You'll understand the reason once you finish watching them." How is this possible? Prosciutto was stunned when he saw the videos Odin sent him. This was because every one of these videos depicted a battle at the other resource node's mythology occupied. Moreover, these battles shared a common point. Zero Wing's experts took part in them. All of them lost. Chapter 2730, Unfathomable. Zero Wing. As Prosciutto watched the videos Odin sent him, his heartbeat gradually grew erratic. Even his complexion turned somewhat gloomy. Vice Commander? Lena prompted, a little puzzled by Prosciutto's reaction. However, Prosciutto did not respond to Lena's worry. Instead, his gaze suddenly turned indescribably grim. Impossible. The commander actually failed to take down that girl? Prosciutto's mood fluctuated violently after watching one of the videos. Vice Commander, what happened? Did something happen on the commander's side? How is that possible? Even the 4 other guilds wouldn't dare pick a fight with the commander unless they're tired of living. Prosciutto's strange performance surprised and puzzled Lena and the others. They couldn't understand what had happened to provoke such emotional swings in their vice commander. After seeing Prosciutto's reaction, Odin smiled and said, "Now you know why, right? I have to admit that the new era has truly come. Whenever I see you youngsters, I can't help but feel that I really have grown old." Odin's words confused Lena and the others even more. However, as if triggered by these words, a hint of excitement flashed in Prosciutto's eyes. "I see. Thank you for your teaching, sir. I will take this as a warning," Prosciutto said sincerely. "Good. Now this is the little fellow I used to fancy." Odin nodded in satisfaction. "Mythology will have to rely on your bunch in the future." "Sir Odin, what exactly happened?" Lena asked Odin nervously. Initially, with her status, she shouldn't be questioning Odin at all. However, after seeing Prosciutto's transformation, she couldn't help her curiosity. "It's nothing. We simply had 4 of our other resource nodes snatched away," Odin said, chuckling. 4 other resource nodes were taken? How is this possible? Lena gaped in shock, unable to get her mind around it. Who is so bold to actually do this? Is it the 4 other guilds? Besides Lena, the peak experts of mythology standing nearby were also stunned by Odin's words, their eyes full of disbelief. Their giving away 1 resource node was already plenty unbelievable. Now they were hearing that 4 more of the guild's resource nodes had been taken. This sounded more like fiction than reality. "You guys have a look too." Seeing the doubtful gazes focused on him, Odin laughed and passed the information to everyone. The information Odin sent consisted of 4 videos showing the battles that took place in the 4 other resource nodes. Moreover, these had occurred when their team was fighting Black Flame. In the first battle video, the person leading the assault on the resource node was Gentle Snow, the woman the various superpowers were currently fearful of. She single-handedly slew over 200 mythology members with just 3 attacks. The 20-plus peak experts didn't even last 1 move against her. They all died in the spatial storm she created. Aside from peak experts, there were also 3 domain realm elders defending the resource node. One of the 3 had even reached the domain realm's upper stage. Yet, even after all 3 of them activated their demi-dragon bloodlines, they actually failed to last more than 10 moves against Gentle Snow. 10 moves. In front of Gentle Snow, the three elders' fierce and enigmatic attacks were jokes. Not only did the woman easily unravel their attacks, but she even turned their attacks against them. She used the combination skill the three elders executed to instantly obliterate the elder that had reached the domain realm's upper stage. In this battle, Mythology had lost over 400 experts. If not for Gentle Snow refraining from pursuing the fleeing members, the guild's losses would have been even worse. In the second battle video, the person leading the attack was Fire Dance. Although Fire Dance did not possess Gentle Snow's monstrous techniques, her basic attributes were not the slightest bit inferior to those of Tier 4 existences. In addition, her speed was simply godlike. From start to end, not one peak expert managed to touch her. The peak experts could only watch as Fire Dance inflicted cut after cut after cut on their armor, continuously plundering their HPs until nothing remained. Of the defending team at the second resource node, only the Lightning Hammer Vice Commander Howard Waz, who was the core of the team, could keep up with Fire Dance's speed. In fact, the two of them were evenly matched, neither able to get the better of the other. However, Alluring Summer was in Zero Wing's team. With her full strength, she cast a Tier 3 super spell on him. This left Howard Waz with no choice but to defend. Otherwise, the super spell would level the resource node itself. During the brief moment Howard revealed a gap in his defense, Fire Dance seized the opportunity to land a heavy blow, breaking one of his arms. Hence, Howard's combat power plummeted. Subsequently, Zhao Yueru triple cast 3 Tier 3 curses on him, finishing him off. With Howard's death, Zero Wing and Frost Heaven's team, which was originally at a disadvantage, immediately gained the upper hand and eventually captured the resource node. Meanwhile, the battle in the third resource node was even more astonishing. Lena and the others nearly went crazy upon watching it. After all, the third resource node's defender was none other than the Divine Spear Demon Rex, the commander of Mythology's trump card Legion. Rex was a legendary individual in Mythology and someone Vice Commander Prosciutto had never once beaten. Yet, in the third video, Rex was actually evenly matched with a girl. Although this girl's basic attributes were only nearing the Tier 4 standard, her control over mana was superb. Wielding 300+ magic blades, she prevented Rex from gaining the upper hand. In fact, the girl even slaughtered many experts from Mythology during their clash. Afterward, Rex grew thoroughly enraged and used the combat array he kept in reserve to try to land a fatal blow on Violet Cloud. However, before this hit could land, a tall man carrying a massive shield blocked it. Subsequently, the battle continued for quite some time. Relying on her nimble movements, Violet Cloud always managed to duck behind Cola's protection at critical moments. While Cola bore the brunt of Rex's attacks, she would also instantly heal Cola back to full HP. The duo's combination turned them into undying zombies, and they held out until Rex's combat array expired. Although both sides suffered equally heavy losses after the long battle, as Rex no longer had the combat array support, he was utterly powerless to do anything about Violet Cloud. To make matters worse, as Zero Wings and Frost Heaven's numbers dwindled, their members became more difficult to kill. In contrast, the rate at which Mythology's members got killed only increased as the battle continued. Eventually, in order to avoid the other guilds taking advantage of Mythology, Rex had no choice but to abandon the resource node to conserve his team's stamina and concentration. While the outcome could be said to be a draw since Mythology gave up the resource node, the overall result was still a loss. "We lost 3 resource nodes just like that?" Lena protested in denial after watching the 3 videos. After calming down though, she said hurriedly, "Even so, there's no reason to let Zero Wing off the hook." While Zero Wing had indeed displayed astonishing combat power, Mythology could easily reclaim its lost resource nodes after reorganizing its forces. After all, they already knew what Zero Wing was capable of. It would be much easier to counter Zero Wing's forces afterward. "Impossible. You'll know once you take a look at the 4th video," Prosciutto said. "The 4th video?" Lena was puzzled. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. What relation did the 4th video have with their not being able to deal with Zero Wing? Even if Black Flame was a Tier 4 Sword Emperor, Mythology still had the means to deal with him. Even if Zero Wing had 1 or 2 more powerful combatants, it still wouldn't be a match for Mythology. However, Lena still listened to Prosciutto and played the 4th video. "What's going on? Why isn't there anything here?" Lena asked when she saw only an empty plane in the video. "That's right. There is nothing at all." Prosciutto nodded. He then added slowly, "Because that place was thoroughly flattened." Chapter 2731, mind-blowing. Although Prosciutto's voice was plain, Every word he said thundered in everyone's mind. Flattened? Lena examined the image in the video again. A moment later, her heart began racing, and her breathing became stifled. Aside from sand, there was nothing else within the 1,000-yard radius displayed in the video. However, after careful inspection, she noticed piles and piles of fallen trees stacked outside the 1,000-yard radius. Many of these trees were uprooted, and most of them had shattered into dozens of pieces. The video then zoomed out, and she found that the so-called sandy area actually lay within a large forest. It looked as if something had thoroughly smoothed out the area. "How is this possible?" a Tier 3 Great Mage at the Void Realm exclaimed. "That sandy area doesn't have any mana." At this Great Mage's reminder, Lena and the others also came to this realization and gasped. They had forgotten that the so-called battle video was actually a type of recording magic in God's domain. It could perfectly record the battlefield situation, which included the ambient mana. This allowed players to analyze the battle situation accurately. Meanwhile, they had watched this battle video as if they were watching a video in the real world. They had completely neglected the presence of mana or lack thereof. "Is this Zero Wings doing as well?" Lena asked when she saw the wasteland in the middle of the forest. The wasteland had a 1,000-yard radius. Moreover, the attack used had thoroughly consumed all mana in the area. Even Tier 4 large-scale destruction spells would have difficulty accomplishing such a feat, not to mention, the only Tier 4 player known to exist was Black Flame. Yes, someone from Zero Wing did it. According to subsequent reports, that person should be Aqua Rose, one of Zero Wing's Vice Guild leaders. "Her specific strength is still a mystery," Odin said, nodding. "However, based on the spell's scale, we can think of her as a Tier 4 Great Wizard who wields Tier 4 large-scale destruction spells. Her destructive power is roughly 10 times that of Black Flame." "How is this possible? Isn't Zero Wing just an up-and-coming pseudo-superpower?" After hearing Odin's simple analysis, Mythology's members fell silent for a long time. They couldn't help doubting the veracity of the reports. Not only did Zero Wing have a Tier 4 Great Wizard, but this Great Wizard even possessed Tier 4 large-scale destruction spells. If this was the case, then this matter was much more serious than they imagined. After all, a Great Wizard wielding large-scale destruction spells could easily destroy even major NPC cities. At this stage of the game, such an existence would be invincible, be it in offensive or defensive battles. Meanwhile, in this competition, it wouldn't matter to a Great Wizard how many players were fortifying a resource node. All it would take was one Tier 4 large-scale destruction spell to end everything. And if one wasn't enough, then a second one would do. "But, are we really going to just give up?" Lena asked. Mythology was one of the 5 great super guilds. It was sheer humiliation for the guild to get provoked on such a stage. If Mythology didn't do something, the whole world would start to look down on it. "Of course not." Odin suddenly smiled. "We must settle this account one way or another, but now isn't the time for that yet. Instead, we should learn from Miracle's example." "Learn from Miracle?" Lena parroted, confused. Beak-Taz M/B avert/B Miracle was merely a slightly above-average superpower. What could Mythology possibly learn from it? "Sir Odin is right. We have to learn Miracle's way of doing things," Prosciutto said with brightened eyes. "We have to publicize this matter so that all the guilds will know about it. Zero Wing might be able to help Frost Heaven secure the 6th seat this time, but what they don't know is that the real doomsday will come after they secure the seat. The reserved seats of God's domain's 12 great guilds were meant for the capable. If a guild relied on the strength of only a handful of individuals to secure one of these seats, then only destruction would await this guild. Moreover, after this competition, Zero Wing would also debut on the international stage. A guild capable of using Mythology as a stepping stone wasn't a problem for only Mythology. The other 4 of the 5 great super guilds couldn't afford to ignore Zero Wing either. Hence, the 5 great super guilds would not allow such an existence to exist in this world. "Good. I will leave this matter for you to handle." Odin nodded in satisfaction when he saw Prosciutto realizing what had to be done. He then vanished from the group as if he had never been there. Shortly afterward, every participating guild in the competition received an astonishing piece of news. Zero Wing had defeated Mythology and stolen 5 of Mythology's resource nodes. The battle videos at the 5 resource nodes even spread to the various superpowers. The sight of Black Flame killing Sandstorm in one move, Gentle Snow killing over 30 Tier 3 peak experts in one move, Aqua Rose flattening a resource node with one spell, Violet Cloud forcing the Divine Spear Demon into retreating, and a handful of Zero Wings members killing the Lightning Hammer were thoroughly etched into everyone's mind. After all these accomplishments, Frost Heaven became the biggest dark horse in this competition. The mind-blowing news shook the various participating guilds in the arena. This is fake. This must be fake. Didn't Zero Wings and Frost Heaven's members launch an attack on mythology only recently? How can the battles be over already? A Tier 4 Great Wizard? How is this possible? The various participating guilds were dumbfounded by the information they received. None of them could accept it. However, it was also impossible for these battle videos to be fake, especially with the frightening strength mythology displayed. The superpowers despaired at the gap between them. Nevertheless, despite having such overwhelming strength, mythology still ended up defeated. Moreover, it didn't even lose at the hands of a super guild but to Zero Wing, an up-and-coming pseudo-superpower. Didn't they say Zero Wing doesn't have any background? What exactly is Zero Wing? For a time, the various superpowers were filled with curiosity and confusion about Zero Wing. Despite being a small guild with no backing, Zero Wing had produced a Tier 4 Sword Emperor and a suspected Tier 4 Great Wizard. How could they bring themselves to believe this? As for the players in the spectator stands, they too were stunned by this situation. They never thought that during the time Shi Feng was fighting one of mythology's teams, astonishing battles had taken place elsewhere as well. They also regretted missing these battles. After witnessing Zero Wing's strength, both the Star Alliances and Unyielding Souls upper echelons couldn't help lamenting this situation. They never thought that after not meeting Zero Wing for some time, the other guild had actually grown to such an extent already. Tier 4. This is real power. A passionate flame burned in Purple Eye's heart as she watched the clash between Shi Feng and Sandstorm. So long as I reach Tier 4, the guild will be able to tread the international stage as well. At this time, Purple Eye wasn't the only person to have such thoughts. The various major powers experts in the other VIP viewing rooms also burned with desire and ambition toward attaining Tier 4. Every one of them resolved themselves to do everything they could to reach Tier 4 after this competition. Unlike the audience's excited reactions, Miracle and Sacred Temple were filled with both hatred and shock at Zero Wing's performance. Initially, the two guilds believed the 6th reserve seat was already within their grasp. Now that a powerful competitor had emerged in the competition, the two guilds had no choice but to compete for more resource nodes. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to maintain their current advantage until the end of the competition. Meanwhile, when Seven Wonders received news of Zero Wing's performance, he felt an unprecedented joy and excitement. He truly had not expected the helpers Hong Xinyuan recruited to be powerful enough to pull Frost Heaven out of its hopeless situation and give it a chance to win a reserve seat. To ensure Frost Heaven secured the 6th reserve seat, after Frost Heaven became one of the top 5 ranking guilds on island number 17, Seven Wonders led a team to other islands to compete for more resource nodes. For a time, Miracle, Sacred Temple, and Frost Heaven frantically fought all over the arena. Despite suffering immense casualties, the three guilds continued fighting until the bell signaling the end of the competition rang. Meanwhile, after the competition ended, huge holographic screens appeared on top of every island, the screens listing the total points accumulated by the participating guilds one after another. Mythology, 12,610 points. Pantheon, 3,920 points. Sky Dragon Family, 4,550 points. Netherworld Empire, 13,350 points. Miracle, 5,230 points. Sacred Temple, 5,180 points. As the names of the participating guilds appeared one after another, Frost Heaven's members grew increasingly nervous. The point difference between Miracle, Sacred Temple, and Frost Heaven should be incredibly narrow. In fact, partway through the competition, Shi Feng even had to attack other resource nodes personally and let Frost Heaven's members wear the resource emblem to keep Frost Heaven in the competition. Although there were instances where other guilds had successfully stolen some of Frost Heaven's poorly defended resource nodes, most of these nodes were quickly reclaimed. In addition, Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose also wandered between the various resource nodes to avert the ambushes of other guilds. We must succeed. Mushin also grew incredibly nervous as she looked at the screen. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU Frost Heaven had suffered tremendous losses during this competition. By the end of the competition, Frost Heaven had fewer than 2,000 members left standing. 6 elders, 2 grand elders, and Great Elder Brilliant Blue had even fallen in battle. This was a massive blow to the guild. At this time, even Shi Feng couldn't remain perfectly calm. He never expected that Miracle and Sacred Temple would secretly ally with other guilds to attack Frost Heaven's resource nodes, forcing him to rotate continuously between several islands. He had even had Aqua Rose obliterate 11 resource nodes. Only then did they manage to deter the other guilds from stealing Frost Heaven's resource nodes. Now that Zero Wing had exhausted its trump cards and revealed many things to the various superpowers, if Frost Heaven still failed to secure the 6th seat in this competition, then Zero Wing would have a thorny road ahead of the next moment. After more than 20 guilds were listed on the screen, Frost Heaven's name finally appeared. Frost Heaven, 5,260 points. Chapter 2732, True Beginning, We Won. We really won. Mushin and the other Frost Heaven members were ecstatic when they saw their guild score. Many members even screamed in joy as they reveled in this moment of victory. What a close one. Shi Feng couldn't help a sigh of relief. In the end, Frost Heaven had beaten Miracle by only 30 points, which was just 1 hour's worth of points for an advanced resource node. If not for some of the other guilds giving up on competing for Frost Heaven's resource nodes, Miracle might have won the 6th seat instead. Shi Feng had to admit that Miracle's foundations were much stronger than many super guilds. Fortunately, everything went according to plan. Now that Frost Heaven has secured the 6th seat, we won't have to worry about getting slots to enter the upper zone. We'll also gain the privilege of garrisoning a city in a kingdom. When Shi Feng saw the guilds listed on the screen being reorganized based on their points and Frost Heaven officially ranking 6th, he began considering the next step of his plans. In his previous life, the arrival of the first major update had brought about a complete change in God's domain's power structure. Because of the NPC Forces addition, the superpowers competitors were no longer limited to just the major powers. The NPC Forces also became huge competitors. These NPC Forces were no ordinary organizations. Before God's domain underwent its first major update, the NPC population in God's domain had been minuscule. However, after the major update, the NPC population would increase crazily. Along with the increase in NPC population, the NPC forces normally only mentioned in books or conversations between NPCs would make their debut in the game. In fact, in a few more days, the various major powers would discover a frightening matter. Despite how massive God's domain's player population was, players made up only a small minority of God's domain's inhabitants. Yes. Despite the game's current player population being over 10 billion, players were only a minority in the world of God's domain. Being in the future, any random kingdom would easily have over 2 billion NPCs. The current player population could, at best, match the total NPC population in 5 or 6 kingdoms, which was roughly equivalent to the standard of one empire. However, God's domain's players were scattered across the various kingdoms and empires on the 2 main continents. There were also a large number of players in the many other worlds. Hence, in the future, the native powers would become the strongest forces in the various kingdoms and empires. Moreover, after this major update, a severe problem would pop up: the disappearance of the protection mechanism for players. At this point, most players weren't even aware of this protection mechanism's existence. This was because this so-called protection mechanism only prevented NPCs from actively targeting players. Hence, most players wouldn't notice its existence and true purpose. They merely took its benefits for granted. However, all of this would change in the world of God's domain in the future. So long as players left the city, they would no longer enjoy this protection mechanism. What did this mean? Ordinary players would most likely have a difficult time imagining the consequences of such a change. However, this would be a disaster for the growing guilds of God's domain. This was because NPCs would become capable of taking the initiative to attack players. Highway robbery, launching ambushes when players were killing monsters, killing players because of a random mood swing. Such incidents would become normal occurrences in the future. In fact, Shi Feng himself had been robbed by Tier 4 NPCs on numerous occasions in his previous life. Of course, powerful NPCs wouldn't rob just anyone they saw. They would focus on stealing incredibly valuable items. Ordinary items would hardly arouse the interest of these powerful NPCs. This change in the game was highly unfavorable for Shi Feng. After all, he carried too many valuable items. As he had the game's rules protecting him before, he hadn't worried about NPCs attacking him. Now that the rules had changed, he had no choice but to act carefully. However, this still wasn't the critical point of the major update. Instead, the fatal change caused by this update was in the management of guild towns and cities. During the early phases of the major update, most players still hadn't noticed a problem with the NPC forces. However, once the local NPC forces finished conducting a thorough investigation on players, they would begin attacking guild towns. If a guild town lacked sufficient combatants to defend it, the territory might very well end up getting taken. This was also one of the main reasons why many superpowers had disbanded after God's domain underwent its first major update in the past. Meanwhile, the situation now was even worse than during Shi Feng's previous life. In the past, when the first major update hit, the various superpowers already had Tier 4 players defending its territories. However, in this life, let alone Tier 4 players, the superpowers didn't even have many Tier 3 players under their command. It would become a nightmare for the superpowers to defend their guild towns against the various NPC forces. At this point, Shi Feng could already foresee many powers crumbling due to these changes. Compared to his previous life, the first major update's aftermath in this life would definitely be a much more painful sight. Once we get the guild privileges, we'll be able to garrison an NPC city and apply for a guild town teleportation permit. Then Zero Wing could instantly become a giant in God's domain during the poaching wars. When Shi Feng thought about the imminent poaching wars, he couldn't help feeling a little excited. In the past, some first-rate guilds had eventually grown into super guilds precisely because they managed to take advantage of the poaching wars. In the early stages of God's domain, the superpowers had a massive advantage in numbers over the major powers. By the time players had reached level 100, the major powers had mostly divided the available player population among themselves already. Hence, even some of the stronger guilds among the major powers had found it incredibly difficult to grow further. This was because after the average level of players reached level 100, guilds that wished to grow needed sufficient numbers. This was especially true when it came to Tier 3 players. Without sufficient Tier 3 players, effectively defending guild towns against NPC forces and monster armies would become impossible. Meanwhile, most players mainly looked at the number of guild towns a guild possessed and the prosperity of these towns when determining a guild's strength. This was also why the War God's Temple had set the number of guild towns owned as a participation requirement for the reserve seat competition. And if a guild wished to maintain many guild towns simultaneously, a lot of manpower was necessary. Now, although Zero Wing already possessed more members than most first-rate guilds, it was still far from comparable to the various superpowers. Meanwhile, after the Great Collapse, the members of the fallen powers would become independent players. So long as Zero Wing took advantage of this opportunity, it could instantly become a bona fide superpower. Moreover, Shi Feng was confident that once Zero Wing had a sufficient player base, the guild could go up against Starlink, Saint's Hand, and even the 5 great super guilds. At the very least, Zero Wing wouldn't be forced to hole up in just a handful of guild towns and cities in an incredibly passive state. In fact, with Zero Wing's current state, it was only a matter of time before the guild crumbled. After all, what allowed the various superpowers to triumph over others were the talents they cultivated. With the resources the superpowers provided, these talents would slowly grow into powerhouses in the virtual gaming industry over time. If Zero Wing did not make sufficient preparations with the guild's current scale and talent count, the guild would be fortunate to keep itself alive in the future. Meanwhile, along with the release of the official rankings, the spectating players and major powers erupted in an uproar. Crap. Frost Heaven actually got a seat. Frost Heaven really is lucky. It actually found a dark horse like Zero Wing. With this, Frost Heaven really is going to rise to prominence. Zero Wing, is it? While the spectating players and major powers found Frost Heaven's victory surprising, they didn't feel particularly surprised by it either. After all, the Tier 4 combatants Zero Wing possessed were simply too terrifying. They were not opponents Tier 3 players could hope to contend with. The major powers paid more attention to Zero Wing than to Frost Heaven. Frost Heaven can consider themselves lucky. After looking at the guild rankings, Cold Shadow glanced at Shi Feng's information and sneered. However, Zero Wing won't be as lucky afterward. The nail that sticks out gets hammered. This held especially true for a prominent guild like Zero Wing. The various superpowers were greatly limited in the forces they could bring out during this competition. This was especially true for the 5 great super guilds. After all, Tier 3 was the minimum standard for players to participate in the competition. However, there was no such restriction in the outside world. The fact that Zero Wing had revealed 2 Tier 4 players in this competition had provoked the various superpowers' intense envy. Zero Wing was merely a pseudo-superpower, yet it had actually produced 2 Tier 4 players. If someone were to say that there wasn't a secret behind this achievement, nobody would believe them. After this competition, she could easily foresee that both ordinary powers and superpowers would hound Zero Wing until the guild gave up its secret to completing the Tier 4 promotion. Otherwise only death would await Zero Wing. As the various superpowers began to plot against Zero Wing, Shi Feng remained wholly unaware of the matter. After the War Gods Temple announced the winners for the 6 reserve seats and awarded Zero Wing with a War Gods Temple official guild certificate, Shi Feng promptly disbanded his team and bid goodbye to Mushin. He did not stay behind to take part in Frost Heaven's celebration banquet but quietly left the Fire Dragon Empire instead. This caused 7 Wonders and Hong Xingyuan to lament the missed opportunity to thank Shi Feng properly. Black Flame really is an unfathomable person. After watching Shi Feng's figure disappear into the distance, 7 Wonders turned to Mushin and said earnestly, "Mushin, you'll be the first vice guild leader from now on. You'll be responsible for the matter regarding the upper zone slots, S-rank nutrient fluids, and subsequent affairs relating to our alliance with Zero Wing. I believe you can handle them well. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You guild leader, please rest assured. I will definitely handle them well," Mushin answered ecstatically. Meanwhile, after Shi Feng left the War Gods Temple, he did not hurry to return to Zero Wing's residence to preside over the changing situation. Instead, he made his way to the Twin Towers Kingdom, a dilapidated country on the brink of destruction, which would also become one of the most brilliant kingdoms in the future. Twin Towers City Hall. "Sir, how may I be of service?" a level 180 Tier 3 male administrator asked when he saw Shi Feng enter the building. "If you wish to purchase land, I will have to apologize in advance. We are no longer selling land to the public." "No, I'm not here to purchase land," Shi Feng said, shaking his head. He then took out the official guild certificate from the War Gods Temple and said, "I am Zero Wing's guild leader. My guild wishes to officially garrison this city. May I know if that's possible?" Chapter 2733, Garrisoning Twin Towers. Vico, the level 180 Tier 3 male administrator, looked at the certificate in Shi Feng's hand and carefully inspected it. "Yes, this is indeed an official guild certificate from the War Gods Temple." Vico nodded, his gaze turning respectful as he looked at Shi Feng. He then added slowly, "Lord Guild Leader, there is nothing wrong with your guild certificate. However, I'm afraid that as an ordinary guild, your guild does not qualify to garrison our kingdom's capital. You can only choose to garrison another of the Twin Towers Kingdom's cities." Sure enough, the guild still can't garrison the capital city. Shi Feng was not particularly surprised by Vico's rejection. Since that's the case, Zero Wing will garrison Sky Spring City. Although the War Gods Temple now recognized Zero Wing as an official guild in God's domain, that was only recognition and nothing more. Initially, Shi Feng thought that with the deterioration of the Twin Towers Kingdom due to the abyssal monsters, Zero Wing might have a chance to garrison its capital. However, it would seem that he had still underestimated the Twin Towers Kingdom. After thinking it through, though, he found this situation reasonable. In his previous life, the Twin Towers Kingdom had shone brightly on the continent of God's domain, thanks to the Tower of Time and Secret Covenant Tower it housed. It had been a kingdom that stood far above other kingdoms. Moreover, while the Twin Towers Kingdom might currently look battered, now that the first major update had taken place, NPCs would start appearing in large numbers across the kingdom. Once that happened, it was only a matter of time before the NPCs turned the tables on the abyssal monsters. Otherwise, Shi Feng wouldn't have rushed to have Zero Wing garrison the Twin Towers Kingdom. "That won't be a problem. Please follow me. I will conduct the procedures for you," Vico said and led Shi Feng to the third-floor hall. On his way to the third floor, Shi Feng noticed that the number of NPCs inside the city hall had increased significantly. Previously, it was rare to see even one Tier 3 NPC in a city hall. Now he spotted at least a dozen. Moreover, even the weakest of them was at level 140, while the strongest reached level 182. They were not existences current Tier 3 players could hope to contend against. Through this, he could already anticipate a large batch of Tier 3 NPCs appearing inside the Twin Towers Kingdom in the near future. With the combat power of these NPCs, retaking the Twin Towers Kingdom and driving the abyssal monsters back into the abyss would be entirely possible. Meanwhile, the Sky Spring City he chose to have Zero Wing garrison was the closest NPC city to the Secret Covenant Tower. Although Sky Spring City didn't even rank within the top 15 of the Twin Towers Kingdom's NPC cities, after the first major update, the Secret Covenant Tower would become more attractive than the Tower of Time. This was because the Secret Covenant Tower was a holy land for grinding for levels and acquiring guild resources. Before God's Domain's first major update took place, grinding for levels was a daily chore for players. However, after the first major update, grinding for levels would become deadly. If players did not possess overwhelming strength, then the moment they left the confines of NPC cities, they would have to fight with their lives on the line. This was because both NPCs and monsters gained conscious thought after the major update, and they would no longer let players kill them like idiots. Both NPCs and monsters would fight desperately for survival. Hence, grinding monsters would no longer be simple, repetitive fights for EXP. Instead, it would become a fight where players bet their lives for EXP. In a situation where the two sides were roughly equal in strength, every fight would be incredibly taxing. In fact, after the major update, most players would no longer dare fight monsters that were significantly higher level than they were. Of course, the increased difficulty in killing monsters came in tandem with a drastic increase in the EXP monsters awarded, at least 10 times more than what they previously awarded. Even so, leveling up would still become an increasingly laborious task in the future. However, it was a different story in the Secret Covenant Tower. The countless monsters trapped in the Secret Covenant Tower's special space had already gone crazy and did not possess any consciousness or intelligence. The only thing on their minds was slaughter. Yet, despite the lack of intelligence, the monsters inside granted the same amount of EXP as the monsters in the outside world. The only problem was that entering the Secret Covenant Tower cost magic crystals. In addition, the monsters inside did not drop coins or magic crystals. The value of the materials they dropped was also negligible. Fortunately, the Secret Covenant Tower wasn't completely barren of loot. Hidden inside the special space were relics belonging to ancient civilizations. The deeper one progressed down the tower, the better the relics one could obtain. Examples would be weapon and equipment designs, master-ranked potion recipes, and even complete legacies for Tier 3 classes. Yes, complete legacies for Tier 3 classes. Unlike the Tier 3 legacies scattered in the outside world, a complete legacy could lower the difficulty of players' Tier 3 promotion by a large margin. A complete Tier 3 legacy could allow a guild to gain a large number of Tier 3 players within a short period. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that, for guilds, a complete Tier 3 legacy was 100 times more valuable than a fragmented legendary item. Meanwhile, complete Tier 3 legacies only started appearing from the 18th floor. This was a place that became available after the first major update. Before this, the Secret Covenant Tower was only a place for pre-level 100 players to grind for levels. It wasn't suitable for players past level 100. However, after the first major update, the Secret Covenant Tower would no longer be the same as before. In the past, after it was revealed that the Secret Covenant Tower dropped complete Tier 3 legacies, the various powers on the Eastern continent had swarmed to the Twin Towers Kingdom. This, in turn, had made the Twin Towers Kingdom one of the most dazzling kingdoms in God's domain, and Sky Spring City had also become an NPC main city that was second only to the capital city. Shortly afterward, Administrator Vico completed all the formalities needed for Zero Wing to garrison Sky Spring City. Lord Guild Leader, this is your Sky Spring City Guild token. Vico handed a golden token to Shi Feng. He then explained, this token grants you partial authority to manage Sky Spring City, including its security and development. Once Zero Wing garrisons Sky Spring City, it will receive 10% of the city's profits as maintenance and management fees. No problem. Zero Wing will manage Sky Spring City well and turn it into the best city in the Twin Towers Kingdom, Shi Feng said, nodding. Once a guild garrisoned a city, it couldn't arbitrarily decide to abandon the city and seek greener pastures. One could say that the guild and city were bound together for good or ill. Thus, even after guilds obtained the qualifications to garrison an NPC city, they still had to be careful with their choice. Fortunately, Shi Feng didn't have to concern himself with such a problem. Sky Spring City was bound to become one of the important hubs in the Eastern continent. The money and resources it could rake in would far surpass those of many royal capitals. If developed properly, the city could even rival imperial capitals. I pray that you can fulfill this wonderful goal, my lord, Vico said, feeling slightly surprised by Shi Feng's confidence. Now that Zero Wing has officially garrisoned Sky Spring City, can we enable Sky Spring City's city teleportation network? Shi Feng asked. Obtaining the resources Sky Spring City had to offer was only one of his goals in having Zero Wing garrison the city. What was more important for Zero Wing was the city teleportation network that came with garrisoning a city. This was also the main reason the various superpowers had frantically fought to secure a reserve seat. Certainly. However, your guild will have to handle the cost of binding with Sky Spring City's teleportation magic array, Vico said with a hint of joy in his voice. How much will it cost to construct one large-scale teleportation array? Shi Feng asked. If it is only one, the material fee is 100,000 gold coins and 30,000 magic crystals. The labor cost is an additional 5,000 gold, Vico said. In total, it will cost 105,000 gold and 30,000 magic crystals. You guys sure are ruthless. It's just a bunch of ordinary materials, yet you're actually charging me 100,000 gold. Shi Feng was flabbergasted at Vico's quote. If it were before, he might have accepted this price as normal. However, after gaining experience in constructing teleportation arrays, he knew that the materials needed were much cheaper than what Vico quoted him. At most, the material cost should total around several thousand gold. No. The materials the Twin Towers Kingdom uses are the best. No problems will occur even after 1,000 years of use, Vico assured sincerely while shaking his head. Fine, so be it. However, I want everything done within 2 hours, Shi Feng said after taking a look at the time. It had been nearly a day since the first major update took place. Meanwhile, the first wave of the NPC population boom would occur on the second day after the first major update. This was also the moment darkness would befall the various powers. That won't be a problem, Vico said confidently. May I know which guild city you wish to construct the teleportation array in? Silverwing City. Shi Feng answered after giving the question some thought. Silverwing City was pivotal to Zero Wing's future development and resistance against Saint's Hand. Hence, it was imperative that Silverwing City developed as rapidly as possible. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Although it is slightly far, so long as Milord makes the full payment, we will act immediately, Vico said, gritting his teeth as he looked at the map. To Vico's joy, Shi Feng paid the 105,000 gold and 30,000 magic crystals without hesitation. After receiving the coins and magic crystals, the NPC promptly left the private lounge, evidently making his way to Silverwing City. Next, I'll have to see how much the NPC population will increase during the initial wave. Shi Feng's gaze grew solemn after Vico left the room. Hopefully the number isn't too significant. Although he had managed to execute his plan in time, its success still depended heavily on how much the NPC population grew after the first population boom. If the increase in NPC count was too severe, even Zero Wing would be overwhelmed. After all, the guild simply had too few Tier 3 combatants right now. Meanwhile, Tier 3 combatants were the minimum requirement for maintaining public order in guild towns. At 6 a.m., the sun slowly rose into the sky and shone its dazzling rays onto the various cities of God's domain, symbolizing a new day in God's domain. Chapter 2734, New World begins. Typhoon Empire, Typhoon City. The morning sun's rays shone on the secret pavilion's residence. However, nobody in the residence's scorching atmosphere was in the mood to enjoy this cool morning sun. As the competition for the reserve seats had just ended, the many budding talents and matured powerhouses that had debuted during the competition were now a target of attention for the secret pavilion. To sort out the information of these people and sell the information in the next publication of the God's Domain's experts list, the whole secret pavilion had become extremely busy. Every secret pavilion member within the Typhoon City residence was either sending out information to other branches or organizing the information they received from other branches. Everyone was so busy that they lost track of time. Uncle Yuan, the strength Zero Wing displayed this time is truly astonishing. One Tier 4 Sword Emperor and one suspected Tier 4 Great Wizard that wields Tier 4 large-scale destruction spells. Zero Wing has even become a guild officially recognized by the War God's Temple. The various superpowers will have to fear Zero Wing now, Purple Jade exclaimed as she read the report on Zero Wing in her hands. Bean Zero Wing was a guild they had watched grow from nothing to its current state. Initially, Zero Wing had been a small guild that couldn't even be considered third-rate. However, it gradually grew into a large guild that could challenge even first-rate guilds. Afterward, it had fought against superpowers time after time. Now, it even stood on the international stage of God's Domain and aided Frost Heaven in securing the 6th reserve seat, shocking countless powers in God's Domain in one fell swoop. At this point, even the various superpowers had to acknowledge that Zero Wing was a guild to be wary of. The only thing Zero Wing lacked now was a sufficiently strong foundation. It just didn't have the frightening manpower and expansive territory of a superpower. While that's correct, you shouldn't forget that Zero Wing is a guild that is completely reliant on only a handful of individuals to support it. The guild is walking a tightrope, and a single mistake can lead to disaster. Now it has even become the focus of God's domain's various powers, Yuan Tiexian said in a low tone, shaking his head. The Tier 4 promotion quest is simply too challenging. You should know this as well. Yet, Zero Wing has 2 people suspected to have completed their promotions. You should know very well what this implies. Uncle Yuan, you mean, Zero Wing has grasped a way to complete the Tier 4 promotion quest easily? Purple Jade was a little shocked. According to the Secret Pavilion's information gathering, the hardest part in completing the Tier 4 promotion quest was searching for one's Tier 4 legacy land. Even the Secret Pavilion had yet to locate a single Tier 4 legacy land. If Zero Wing really found a reliable way to locate Tier 4 legacy lands, this would be an incredibly frightening matter. This is only conjecture. We still don't have any evidence to back it up right now. Moreover, I think the possibility of this being true is low. After all is said and done, God's domain is a relatively fair game. If Tier 4 legacy lands could be located easily, Tier 4 classes wouldn't be considered powerhouses in God's domain, Yuan Tiexian said, shaking his head. Even so, just the possibility holds an incredibly fatal attraction for the various powers. According to the inside information we've secured thus far, we can confirm that over a dozen superpowers are already preparing to suppress Zero Wing. In addition, Zero Wing has plenty of enemies: the War-Blood Adventurer team on Dragonheart Island, the Dark World's various powers in the Dark Knight Empire, and Saint's Hand in Starmoon Kingdom. Starlink, Zero Wing's old nemesis, has also been conducting a series of secretive operations recently. Starlink seems to be planning something big by the looks of it. If these superpowers join forces, even if Zero Wing has a Sword Emperor and a Great Wizard defending its territories, the guild will still have difficulty surviving. Purple Jade's complexion turned ugly at Yuan Tiexian's analysis. A pseudo-superpower was actually fighting on 3 different fronts. Moreover, every one of its opponents was either a superpower or an organization backed by a superpower. Anyone that heard this would definitely feel despair. For Zero Wing to survive until now, this was simply a miracle. Of course, Shi Feng and the rest of Zero Wing's upper echelon might not be afraid of the various superpowers as individuals, but it was a different story for a guild with so many members. It would be very easy for the various superpowers to attack such a guild. Meanwhile, if a guild lacked manpower, there were many things it couldn't accomplish. One such example was the collection of resources. Just this point alone would be sufficient to make Shi Feng and the others crumble. What more operating guild towns and cities? This is just the situation on the eastern continent. Zero Wing isn't safe on the western continent either. I heard that many of the western continent's superpowers are showing interest in the Starlight Fortress, Yuan Tiexian said, chuckling when he saw the blank expression on Purple Jade's face. You should know by now that Zero Wing has always been walking a tightrope, right? What happens next will depend on what kind of decision Black Flame makes. If Black Flame handles this properly and avoids disaster with Zero Wing's current foundations, it is definitely possible for the guild to progress further. If it's mishandled, then Zero Wing will be eternally doomed. When Yuan Tiexian stated his last sentence, his voice was filled with confidence. That was because, unlike most people, he knew that mythology was most likely the driving force behind the various superpowers' decision to act against Zero Wing this time. Mythology was a behemoth. It had an unfathomable foundation in both the virtual gaming world and the real world. It was an existence that even the current Secret Pavilion feared greatly. As Yuan Tiexian and Purple Jade conversed, the sound of hurried footsteps suddenly came from outside the office door. The next moment, a level 114 Tier 3 ranger barged into the office, which made Yuan Tiexian frown in obvious dissatisfaction with this Tier 3 ranger's panicky actions. What's the matter? Why are you in such a rush? Yuan Tiexian questioned in a low tone. It's bad. Elder Yuan, something big happened. The Tier 3 ranger reported hurriedly as he wiped the sweat off his forehead. Just a while ago, our branches sent in news that a large number of NPCs have appeared on the streets of the various cities. So what if NPCs appeared? What's there to be surprised about? Yuan Tiexian reacted nonchalantly. In God's domain, as a town or city developed, the number of NPC residents would increase. This was a normal occurrence. Moreover, players and NPCs practically lived in 2 completely different worlds. The interactions between the 2 sides were few and far between. But the numbers are far too massive, the Tier 3 ranger insisted anxiously. How many? Yuan Tiexian asked, his curiosity piqued. Too many. I don't know how many appeared either. Gulping, the Tier 3 ranger pointed at the nearby window and said, "I think you should look for yourself, Elder Yuan. This matter has already caused an uproar among the players in the city." Uproar? Yuan Qiexing couldn't help his puzzlement. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. However, he felt that the ranger before him shouldn't be lying. He immediately stood up and approached the window. When the view outside the French window entered his sight, Yuan Qiexing froze on the spot in stupefaction. "Uncle Yuan?" Purple Jade grew puzzled as well when she saw Yuan Qiexing standing stock still. She then walked toward the window to take a look as well. NPCs thronged the main street outside the residence, talking and laughing in groups. Many were adventurers clad in exquisite equipment. Even the lowest leveled among them was level 120, while the strongest one reached level 194. Moreover, these NPC adventurers were Tier 3 on average, with even the weakest one at Tier 2. Aside from these NPC adventurers, there was also a large number of NPC civilians on the street. Purple Jade even saw NPC children running around, playing with pebbles on the street and even fighting each other with wooden swords. These NPCs accounted for over 80% of the people on the main street. Chapter 2735. Different Gods Domain, Zero Wings Decision. Why are there so many NPCs? Purple Jade couldn't believe her eyes as she looked at the NPCs chatting merrily on the main street. Their current location was an island nation on the western continent, with an incredibly harsh environment. As a result, the player population here was insignificant, let alone the NPC population. If not for the increased trade between the two main continents, which attracted many powers and merchant players to the Typhoon Empire, the number of people walking on the main street wouldn't have exceeded 100. So, what was with this situation? With just a casual glance, she already spotted more than 1,000 NPCs, many of them NPC adventurers. Players were only a small group of unremarkable existences. After pondering for some time, Yuan Qiexing turned around and asked the Tier 3 ranger, "Have you investigated the origins of these NPCs yet?" "We've investigated already. However, we don't know where these NPCs came from. The only thing we know is that these NPCs seem to have appeared directly inside the various NPC cities," the Tier 3 ranger replied, shaking his head. Anxiously, he continued, "The appearance of these NPCs has caused a sharp drop in the number of quests available in the Adventurers Association. The number of quests players can pick up is continuously decreasing. Moreover, what else is there?" Yuan Qiexing asked curiously. According to reports, many players have been killed after coming into conflict with NPCs outside the cities. However, this still isn't the most important part. In an uneasy tone, the ranger continued, "Now, many NPCs have also flooded into the various guild towns and cities, and some NPCs with bad behavior have caused a lot of incidents. Most importantly, according to our observations, various NPC forces are actually secretly investigating us. How is this possible?" Purple Jade goggled in shock. She never thought that there would come a day where the NPCs who only knew how to give quests would secretly investigate them. She got goosebumps at the thought of this. It was as if the dolls they were playing with had suddenly gained life and began secretly observing their every action. At this time, the secret pavilion wasn't the only one shocked by the sudden influx of NPCs in the game. The various powers and players of God's domain were similarly horrified by this situation. "What's going on? Why are so many NPCs competing with us for quests?" "That's nothing. I feel that these NPCs are looking at us players as if they are looking at aliens. Some bars in the city are actually refusing entry to players." "You think that's surprising? Wait till you go out to the fields. Right now, the NPCs out in the fields far outnumber us players. Some of these NPCs are even stealing dungeons from us." For a time, independent players had heated discussions over the sudden changes in God's domain. Everyone felt as if they had truly arrived in a different world. Now, in addition to other players, they also had to compete with NPCs. Moreover, these NPCs were even more difficult to deal with than players. Not only were these NPCs powerful, but they also had an overwhelming advantage in numbers over players. The only advantage players had was their inability to die a permanent death. However, as if understanding this point, the NPCs generally didn't forge irreconcilable feuds with players. Most of them would only teach the players that offended them a lesson. Only the Dark Forces NPCs disregarded this matter. Compared to the independent players, though, the various powers were the ones that had a truly big headache. Damn it. Why did all these NPCs come from? Instead of staying in NPC cities, they actually came to make trouble in our guild towns and cities. Many of our businesses can't even operate normally thanks to them. That's not all. Some NPCs are even robbing our mines and transportation teams. Along with the sudden influx of NPCs, the various powers suddenly found that the difficulty of maintaining the security of guild towns and cities and completing large-scale transportation quests had increased drastically. Some superpowers had even tasted getting bullied for the first time since entering God's domain. However, the current players were simply no match for these NPC forces. Even the superpowers had no choice but to abandon many of their development plans and focus on protecting their territories. As for the major powers, they even began abandoning some of their guild towns to concentrate their forces on defending their crucial territories. For a time, the various player forces in God's domain shrank rapidly. Simultaneously, they also began recruiting members desperately to defend against the NPC forces' assault. Silverwing City, Zero Wing's residence. Due to the sudden increase in the game's NPC population and the many incidents subsequent to this change, Zero Wing's upper echelon had gathered to discuss how to deal with these NPCs. Guild leader, the major powers are frantically recruiting members to consolidate their power. They are also spending a lot of money to hire Tier 3 NPCs from the Adventurers Association to guard their guild towns. If we don't act now, I'm afraid the more powerful Tier 3 NPCs will be snatched up by others, Liang Jing said anxiously to Shi Feng after reading the latest report. The sudden influx of NPCs had caught every player off guard. Originally, the changes to the NPCs after the first major update was already a slight problem. Now that the NPC population far surpassed the player population, this change was no longer just a problem but a disaster. Zero Wing's 3 guild cities held strategic locations and also had incredible growth potential. Meanwhile, according to the information Liang Jing's subordinates sent her, many NPC forces had already set their sights on Zero Wing's guild cities. These NPC forces refrained from taking action only because they were still investigating Zero Wing's strength. However, once they completed their investigation, they would most likely take action immediately. If an NPC force took action, it could create much more trouble than a player force. While the possibility of a frontal confrontation was low, it wasn't exactly impossible. And even if the various NPC forces did not directly assault Zero Wing's guild cities, they could still dispatch NPCs to lurk around the guild cities' trade routes and ambush susceptible targets. That would be a nightmare for Zero Wing. Hence, Zero Wing had to increase its defenses as soon as possible. That's right. Guild leader, if we act slowly, the various major powers will steal all of the powerful Tier 3 NPCs. The other management personnel present nodded in agreement with Liang Jing. In the current situation, even the various superpowers had to lower their heads and hire NPCs from the Adventurers Association. If Zero Wing didn't act now, it would soon be too late. After all, there was a limited number of Tier 3 NPCs available for hire at the Adventurers Association. If the other powers got to pick first, nothing would be left for Zero Wing. Although Zero Wing also had many powerful Tier 3 personal guards, these personal guards were still far from enough to maintain the security of 3 cities. Moreover, the difficulty of directly recruiting Tier 3 personal guards was incredibly high. At best, players could only recruit Tier 2 NPCs with good growth potential. In addition, personal guards cost a lot of money to nurture. On the off chance these personal guards died in combat, Zero Wing would suffer a major blow. However, the Adventurers Association's NPCs wouldn't pose such a problem. Even if these NPCs died, it was none of Zero Wing's concern. The guild wasn't obligated to pay a huge price to resurrect these NPCs. That won't be necessary. Shi Feng shook his head. While hiring the Adventurers Association's Tier 3 NPCs is indeed a solution, it isn't a long-term one. The cost to hire these NPCs is excessive. Any random Tier 3 NPC will cost at least 100 gold per day to hire, and the defense of a small city will require at least 500 Tier 3 NPCs. That's an expenditure of 50,000 gold per day. Only the superpowers could afford to pay a daily maintenance fee of 50,000 gold for one guild city. However, it was a different story for Zero Wing. Zero Wing originally already spent a lot of coins every day. In fact, the guild was reliant on selling coins for credits to maintain the operation of its headquarters in the real world. Hence, it couldn't afford to hire Tier 3 NPCs to safeguard its guild cities at all. But quite a number of NPCs have begun making a ruckus in our cities. Fortunately, we have Tier 4 NPCs defending our cities, so those NPC forces are still cautious when causing a scene. However, if those NPC forces take action against us outside our cities, we'll have a difficult time managing the situation, Yulan said worriedly. Previously, as their opponents were only players, they could still deal with the situation. However, now that their opponents were Tier 3 NPCs that ranged between level 130 and level 160, Zero Wing was in an incredibly unfavorable situation. Of Zero Wing's combatants, the only ones capable of fighting the hostile NPCs were the guild's personal guards. However, these personal guards were necessary for maintaining order in the guild cities. "Let's just stop caring then," Shi Feng said, chuckling. Yulan was stunned by Shi Feng's response. Stop caring? At this moment, let alone Yulan, the other Zero Wing executives present were also stunned. What did Shi Feng mean by that? If they stopped caring about this situation, how would the three guild cities generate income? If the guild cities lost their trade routes, the items sold by NPCs would disappear from the cities. If that happened, the cities would lose a significant portion of their attraction for players. Moreover, the taxes collected from NPC merchants made up a large portion of the guild city's income. From today onward, Zero Wing's three guild cities will prohibit entry to unrelated NPCs. As for NPC merchants, we'll set an exception for them. However, each shop is allowed to bring only 10 people into the cities, Shi Feng said calmly. In addition, raise the entrance fees in all three cities to 20 silver coins and double the rent for the shops. However, partnered powers may receive a 20% discount. Guild leader? Everyone present in the meeting room gaped in shock at Shi Feng's words. They could indeed prevent NPCs from making a ruckus in the three guild cities by prohibiting entry to the majority of NPCs. However, the development of the three cities would also stagnate. After all, players had to get their quests from these NPCs. Moreover, many of the items sold in the three cities were actually sold by NPCs. If they refused entry to NPCs, it would be equivalent to having the income of the three cities. As for raising entrance fees to 20 silver and doubling shop rent, that was basically saying Zero Wing wanted no players inside its guild cities. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU Zero Wing would be digging its own grave if it instituted these measures. Just get it done. I have my reasons, Shi Feng said, not bothering to provide any additional explanations. He then left the meeting room immediately. When the first major update took place in his previous life, the various powers already had plenty of Tier 3 players under their command, with some even having Tier 4 players. However, at present, not only was the NPC population boom much bigger than in the past, but the various powers also barely had any Tier 3 experts under their command. Hence, the damage the various powers would suffer in the ensuing chaos would definitely be much worse than in the past. While Zero Wing indeed possessed great strength and even commanded Tier 4 NPCs, it was still impossible to maintain the three guild cities' security with their current manpower. The only solution Zero Wing had now was to take decisive action and thoroughly prohibit NPCs from entering its guild cities. Afterward, he would have Zero Wing's members enter the secret Covenant Tower in full force to raise their levels and strength. Otherwise, once the NPC population increased even further and the NPC forces began their assault, Zero Wing would be in a ton of trouble. Soon afterward, Zero Wing's three guild cities announced Shi Feng's decision to the outside world. All three cities immediately went into an uproar. Chapter 2736, Crazy Zero Wing? Cold Spring Forest, Stone Forest City, Freedom Hotel? What is Zero Wing thinking? Mu Lingsha, who was resting in a room in the Freedom Hotel, stood up reflexively in surprise when she saw the announcement Zero Wing made in Stone Forest City. Prohibiting NPCs from entering the city at such a time? Even Stone Forest City wouldn't be able to afford such a loss. After reading the city announcement, Unyielding Heart, who sat nearby, pondered before saying, "But this is indeed one way to solve the NPC problem. But at the cost of more than half of the city's revenue? Isn't this too huge a price to pay?" Moreover, Zero Wing directly raised the city's entrance fee to 20 silver to make up for the loss. I'm afraid ordinary players won't be able to accept such a fee. Even the present Stone Forest City would have a hard time justifying it, let alone Zero Wing's two other guild cities, Mu Lingsha said in confusion. The Dark World side is keeping an eye on us. If we show any signs of weaknesses, the Dark World's powers will make a move. I don't know the exact reason for Zero Wing's decision, but this is undoubtedly good news for our guild, Unyielding Heart said, smiling. Good news? A blank look appeared on Mu Lingsha's face. She couldn't understand how this situation was beneficial to Unyielding Soul in any way. The increase in Stone Forest City's entrance fee will undoubtedly drive away many players. Meanwhile, you know how excellent Stone Forest City's environment is. It is the best place among the level 100 plus neutral maps for players to get rid of the foreign energy invading their bodies. There is also nothing currently available that can compete with the Freedom Hotel, Unyielding Heart explained. If players start leaving Stone Forest City, empty slots will appear in the Freedom Hotel. We can have our guild members fill these slots. You're right. Mu Lingsha's eyes glowed in realization. I'll notify the guild leader and have him make the necessary preparations. Even before the first major update, Stone Forest City was incredibly crowded already. Meanwhile, the sudden influx of NPCs had only made the city even more crowded. The city's population had grown so much that the city's management had no choice but to limit traffic into the city. If many NPCs and players left Stone Forest City, it would indeed be a perfect opportunity for Unyielding Soul to develop there. Stone Forest City was one of the few player-owned intermediate cities in God's domain. If Unyielding Soul leveraged this opportunity, its guild members' average level might surpass that of other guilds. Orc Empire, Silverwing City, this is crazy. Zero Wing must be crazy. It doesn't matter if those NPCs are driven away, but why did the rent become more expensive too? This must be Zero Wing's conspiracy. Zero Wing must be trying to drive merchant players like us out of Silverwing City. Zero Wing is awesome. I support Zero Wing. Good riddance to those NPCs. This is a city built by players. I can't even pick up a quest, thanks to all those NPCs. The players residing in Silverwing City had mixed opinions regarding Zero Wing's new regulations. Some criticized Zero Wing for being money crazy, while others approved of the decision. Meanwhile, when the various major powers received word of Zero Wing's decision to prohibit NPCs from entering its cities, they were amused. How bold of Zero Wing. I want to see how it's going to continue operating its 3 guild cities. While everyone else is frantically recruiting members and thinking about how to keep themselves alive, Zero Wing is chasing people away. It seems Zero Wing has grown arrogant after helping Frostheaven become one of the 12 reserve guilds. Now that Silverwing City has taken the initiative to step back in the Orc Empire, it's a good opportunity for our guild to grow. Relay my orders immediately. We'll have our guild town's entrance fee. We'll also lower the membership requirements for our guild. When the various major powers saw Zero Wing driving players away from its cities, they promptly took advantage of this opportunity to increase their market share in the Orc Empire. In less than half an hour, the number of players entering Zero Wing's 3 guild cities decreased significantly. Many ordinary players operating in the Orc Empire opted to visit other guild towns instead. The income Zero Wing generated from NPCs also fell sharply. Guild leader, this really won't do. In less than half an hour, our 3 cities have lost more than 20% of their traffic. At this rate, we would be fortunate to retain even 10% of our usual traffic, Yulan said after urgently contacting Shi Feng. She felt herself going crazy over this situation. All of this was money. As Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose currently weren't in a suitable state to manage Zero Wing, the guild's management was left to Yulan and Liang Jing. Previously, they still weren't aware of Zero Wing's exact situation. However, after shouldering the 2 vice guild leaders' responsibilities, they discovered that Zero Wing had always been walking a tightrope. Now, the guild's financial situation was just barely balanced. However, if Zero Wing were to lose most of its 3 cities' income, the guild would most likely lose the ability to operate normally. After all, the training system in the real world required a lot of energy to operate. Moreover, the guild had increased its internal member count to 5,000. Thus, the amount of money the guild spent every day was staggering. To make matters worse, Zero Wing did not accept the investment of major corporations. If the guild lost its income of coins now, it wouldn't take more than a week for the guild to go bankrupt. I understand. Shi Feng nodded and chuckled when he saw Yolan's anxious expression. But this is only spare change. Spare change? Yulan felt as if she was going to faint. They were losing hundreds of thousands of gold coins per day. Moreover, the various large guilds operating in the Orc Empire hadn't been slacking in developing their respective guild towns. Although none of them had created a basic city yet, they did have advanced towns. In addition, these guilds received a lot of funds from their investors. Hence, the facilities their towns had weren't that far from matching Silverwing cities. The main difference was that the security and convenience level in these towns were far from comparable to Silverwing cities. Shifting his camera angle, Shi Feng smiled and asked, "Can you tell what this building in front of me is?" The next moment, what appeared on Yolan's screen was a massive 5-story tall building. High walls surrounded this building, thoroughly isolating it from the outside world. The density of the mana within the walls was also considerably higher than that of the outside world. Moreover, the building looked the same as the teleportation halls found in NPC cities. A teleportation hall? Yulan gasped. That's right. A teleportation hall. Shi Feng nodded. Moreover, this teleportation hall is the same as the ones found in NPC cities. The only difference is that this thing can teleport people to only one designated NPC city. But even if it can teleport players to an NPC city, I'm afraid the teleportation fee isn't something ordinary players can afford, Yulan said after calming down. It was indeed a great convenience for a guild city to have a teleportation hall. That way, players seeking to travel to Silverwing City or NPC cities could do so within a short period. However, this convenience did not come for free. The cost of teleporting between countries was incredibly high, ranging from several dozen silver coins to several gold coins. This was the reason most players opted to travel by mount or by airship. If players were merely using Silverwing City as a teleportation hub, they wouldn't save themselves much trouble. As for teleporting from the Orc Empire to NPC cities, they could use return scrolls. What you say is correct, but this teleportation hall is linked to a somewhat special location, Shi Feng said, smiling. He fully understood what was going through Yulan's mind. Isn't the destination an NPC city? Yulan asked, puzzled. Even if Silverwing City's teleportation hall were connected to an empire's capital, it wouldn't be of much help to the current Zero Wing. The target destination is indeed an NPC city, but this NPC city is somewhat different from others. Shi Feng nodded. He then added slowly, you won't understand even if I explain it to you. The teleportation hall is already constructed. Contact Unyielding Soul and Crimson Emperor and have them send representatives to Silverwing City. Tell them I have a business proposition for them. Are we inviting them over now? Yulan asked in confusion. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The various superpowers were currently shrinking their spheres of influence, and none of them were having a good time. Even if Shi Feng invited Unyielding Soul and Crimson Emperor for a discussion, the two guilds would most likely be incapable of solving Zero Wing's predicament. Yes, right now. I'm afraid this is something Zero Wing will have difficulty monopolizing, so we'll need some helpers, Shi Feng said, nodding. Guild leader, what are we going to do? Yulan couldn't help asking out of curiosity. The Zero Wing of today was no longer the same as before. It already possessed incredible strength. Yet, Shi Feng intended to ask two superpowers for help. This was undoubtedly going to be a huge operation. Moreover, he had even chosen such a precarious time to carry it out. Any mistake could easily lead to huge problems for the guild. Hearing Yulan's question, Shi Feng chuckled and said casually, it's nothing. It's just an operation to turn Zero Wing into a true giant in God's domain. Chapter 2737, Wealthy Shi Feng Silverwing City, Southern District. On a sparsely populated street, 4 players wearing black cloaks walked slowly into an alleyway. They would also occasionally observe their surroundings to guard against being followed. After the 4 of them walked a certain distance into the alleyway and verified that there were indeed no players following them, they breathed out a sigh of relief. What is this black flame trying to do? Why must we act so secretively and not let others notice us? A female guardian knight with shoulder-length hair demanded in dissatisfaction. Blue. Illusory words, the cleric in holy white robes, glared at the female knight standing beside her. I made an exception and brought you here this time. You'd best pay attention to your words and actions. Blue Gown was the vice commander and lead MT of the main force under Illusory Words' command. She ranked 3rd among the guild's new talents and was also Illusory Words' confidant, who would succeed Illusory Words as vice guild leader in the future. Unfortunately, Blue Gown had a common failing, one that plagued all newcomers trained by superpowers. She did not place anyone outside of super first-rate guilds and super guilds in her eyes. After Illusory Words' scathing reprimand, the beautiful female knight dared not continue with her complaints. Big sis Illusory, I won't talk about this anymore, so you mustn't forget to bring me along for future matters, Blue Gown said pitifully. Pay attention next time, Illusory Word said as she gave Blue Gown a pampering look. She then turned to Unyielding Soul and Mu Lingsha and said, I apologize for letting you see such a joke. It's normal for newcomers to be a little arrogant. You can't achieve anything if you don't have such arrogance. You don't have to mind us, Vice Guild Leader Illusory, Unyielding Heart said. He had long since gotten used to similar sights. In any other virtual reality game, Being one of the top-ranking newcomers of a super first-rate guild was indeed something worth boasting about. After all, a single super first-rate guild or super guild was more than enough to rule an entire virtual reality game back then. How could the top talents of such guilds not be a little arrogant? Hence, it was only natural that these newcomers looked down on up-and-coming guilds. However, the situation was different now. At this point, God's Domain was practically a unique existence already, a game that even international corporations poked their hands into. The influence the various powers in God's Domain held was thousands of times greater than what they held in other virtual reality games. One couldn't use common sense to judge the powers operating within the game at all. Meanwhile, when Blue Gown heard Unyielding Heart's words, although she didn't say anything in response, her eyes held a hint of dissatisfaction. However, I wonder why guild leader Black Flame called both our guilds over this time? He even instructed us to keep our visit a secret, Mu Lingsha said. The current Zero Wing was like the midday sun. Its current problems had a very easy solution: let major corporations invest in the guild. So long as Zero Wing possessed sufficient capital and background, maintaining its current sphere of influence would be a piece of cake. However, Shi Feng did not do so. Instead, he had asked their two guilds over to discuss business. Mu Lingsha couldn't help her puzzlement over Shi Feng's solution to Zero Wing's current predicament. I can't even begin to guess guild leader Black Flame's thoughts, but based on his approach this time, I suspect this isn't going to be a simple matter, Illusory Words said, shaking her head. Shi Feng had brought her too many surprises and miracles. Now she wouldn't find it surprising if he created another miracle. After all, Zero Wing had even managed to help Frost Heaven secure the 6th reserve seat. We don't need to guess anymore. Pointing at tall walls some distance ahead, Unyielding Heart said, "That should be the place guild leader Black Flame told us about. Let's just head inside and listen to why he called us over." When Illusory Words and the others saw the walls Unyielding Heart indicated, they were a little surprised. They never thought that the depths of this small alley would conceal such a massive structure. Although the walls were only around a dozen meters in height, the area they occupied was significant. The enclosure they formed could easily fit a football stadium. Based on the enclosure's size, the building inside should be at the advanced construction standard at the very minimum, yet nobody had discovered its existence even now. When the group of 4 arrived before the steel gate in one of the tall walls, they were dumbfounded. For level 130 plus fine gold guards manned the gate. There was even a level 133, tier 3 dark gold ranked great mage protecting the gate in secret. The level of security was astonishing. At this stage of the game, if these 5 NPCs worked together, they could annihilate a 1,000-man team of tier 3 players. Moreover, the various large guilds were treating fine gold and dark gold guards like precious treasures, showering them with all sorts of resources and ensuring their safety as much as possible. On the other hand, Zero Wing was actually using these precious guards as gatekeepers. "This is private property. What business do you have here?" A fine gold guard clad in gray leather armor asked in a hostile tone when he saw Unyielding Heart's group. "We were invited by guild leader Black Flame." Unyielding Heart promptly took out the invitation he received from Zero Wing, which had Zero Wing's guild leader's seal to prove its authenticity. The magical mark is correct. The tier 3 assassin clad in leather armor nodded. He then said, "Please follow me." "Okay." Unyielding Heart's group then followed the tier 3 assassin through the gate. Upon walking through the entrance, Unyielding Heart and the others gasped automatically. "A teleportation hall? How is this possible? Aren't teleportation halls restricted to the national level?" Blue Gown couldn't believe her eyes when she saw the 5-story tall teleportation hall before her. She never thought Zero Wing could actually construct this sort of transportation tool in Silverwing City. Beat RA/beat B greater than N/B, or even now, teleportation arrays were incredibly rare items among the superpowers. What more, a complete teleportation hall? Teleportation halls might be common in NPC cities, but for guild cities, they were priceless treasures that could skyrocket a guild city into prominence. The world of God's Domain was massive. It took a long time for players to travel to level 100 plus maps even on flying mounts, and much longer for players without flying mounts. Many powers and adventure teams would be willing to break the bank if it meant they could teleport directly to somewhere close to level 100 plus neutral maps. After all, time represented both money and opportunities for these people. Unlike ordinary players, they couldn't afford to progress at a leisurely pace. "So, this is why we were required to come here quietly? How astonishing." Unyielding Heart smiled bitterly as he looked at the teleportation hall. This should be one of the privileges given to guilds officially recognized by the War God's Temple, Illusory Words said, a hint of envy in her eyes. With such a privilege, developing a guild city would be a piece of cake. Moreover, Silverwing City possessed an excellent environment and strategic location. That's right. This is indeed one of the privileges of an official guild. A voice suddenly entered the ears of Illusory Words and the others, answering the question in their hearts. Guild leader Black Flame, is this teleportation hall the important matter you wish to discuss? Unyielding Heart asked in slight confusion as he pointed at the teleportation hall. A teleportation hall was a godly development tool. So long as Zero Wing publicized the existence of its teleportation hall, combined with Silverwing City's defenses, Silverwing City would have no problem developing rapidly. Unyielding Soul and Crimson Emperor's participation wouldn't make a difference in the endeavor. In fact, their two guilds would want to ask Zero Wing for help instead. Yes, but that's not all of it. Shi Feng nodded. He then smiled and said, there's no point in telling you about it now. Follow me. After saying so, Shi Feng promptly made his way inside the teleportation hall. After Unyielding Heart, Mu Lingsha, Illusory Words and Blue Gown exchanged looks, they followed him. The next moment after the four stepped onto the teleportation array inside the teleportation hall, they found themselves inside the Twin Towers Kingdom Sky Spring City. At this time, however, Sky Spring City didn't have many players. Over 99% of the city's population consisted of NPCs. When these NPCs saw Unyielding Heart's group, they even began eyeing the group curiously as if they had just encountered some rare creatures. Let's go. There are too many people here. After glancing at the NPCs observing them, Shi Feng took out a Tier 3 group teleportation scroll from his bag and activated it. Before Unyielding Heart and the others could react, they were already over 10,000 yards outside of Sky Spring City. Afterward, Shi Feng summoned the Thunder Eagle and ferried the group through the air for over half an hour. At the end of their journey, the group arrived at an ancient tower that pierced the clouds. The tower was easily over 1,000 meters tall. The Secret Covenant Tower? Illusory Words instantly recognized the ancient tower. Curious, she asked, why are we here? She knew a little about the Twin Towers Kingdom's Secret Covenant Tower. The Secret Covenant Tower was an excellent leveling ground for players who had yet to reach level 100. And while there was an entrance fee of 1 magic crystal per person, so long as players didn't die, they could grind inside the tower for as long as they wanted. Initially, many large guilds had brought their new members here to increase their levels quickly. Only, after the introduction of several expansion packs, many more leveling spots became available. Since the monsters inside the Secret Covenant Tower didn't drop any good loot, the various powers had opted to power level their new members elsewhere. With mainstream players having long since exceeded level 100, the Secret Covenant Tower was now a thing of the past. To grow stronger, Shi Feng said, chuckling. To grow stronger? Illusory Words was slightly surprised by Shi Feng's words. But we have long since passed level 100. The current Secret Covenant Tower's limit is no longer level 100, Shi Feng said, shaking his head. Before the major update, the tower's open underground levels were only up to the 18th floor. Back then, the tower was, at best, suitable for players up to level 99. However, the tower's open underground levels are now up to the 36th floor, and the monsters inside reach up to level 150. Vice Guild Leader Illusory, I'm sure you understand what this means, right? When Shi Feng finished speaking, the eyes of Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart lit up with excitement. Nowadays, due to the large number of NPCs competing for quests and monsters, leveling up had become incredibly troublesome. Yet, levels were what players currently lacked the most. If, at the cost of 1 magic crystal per person, players could freely grind the crazed monsters inside the Secret Covenant Tower, their leveling speed would be much faster than what they could achieve in the outside world. Guild Leader Black Flame, do you mean for us to cordon off the Secret Covenant Tower, monopolize it for ourselves, and let our guild members level up rapidly? Unyielding Heart asked, a hint of excitement in his voice. It had originally already been difficult for players to level up past level 100. With the additional competition from NPCs, the endeavor only became even more challenging. However, if Zero Wing, Unyielding Soul and Crimson Emperor had a way to allow their members to reach level 120 rapidly and start challenging their Tier 4 promotion quests, their guild's development speed could surpass the other superpowers by a large margin. No, I don't mean to cordon off the Secret Covenant Tower. Shi Feng shook his head. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You, then? Unyielding Heart prompted, confused by Shi Feng's answer. I want to thoroughly seal off Sky Spring City. Shi Feng's eyes gleamed with a manic light at this proclamation. Aside from the members of our 3 guilds, we will prohibit all outsiders from setting foot in Sky Spring City. Cordon off the entire Sky Spring City? Unyielding Heart was stunned. Guild leader Black Flame, isn't that a little overboard? Illusory Words asked in confusion. While the Secret Covenant Tower can indeed provide faster leveling, the manpower required to thoroughly cordon off an NPC city is too much. With the current state of the game, it will be incredibly taxing for our 3 guilds to do so. Due to the NPC population boom, the various superpowers were short on manpower. Meanwhile, even if Sky Spring City was in decline, its player population still exceeded 100,000. The manpower required to chase away all these players from the city was no laughing matter. Not to mention, their 3 guilds would also have to station many players in the city long term. If we were doing this only for levels, it would indeed be a waste to cordon off the entire city, Shi Feng said. He then walked to the Secret Covenant Tower, pointed at the 2nd floor teleportation array that led to the 19th underground floor, and looked at Illusory Words and the others. He then smiled and continued, but what if the Secret Covenant Tower contains complete legacies for the various Tier 3 classes? Chapter 2738, Tripartite Partnership, Complete Legacies for the Various Tier 3 Classes? Illusory Words, Blue Gown, Unyielding Heart, and Mu Lingsha couldn't help staring at Shi Feng in shock and disbelief. This was especially true for Crimson Emperor's talented rookie, Blue Gown. She found Shi Feng's words fantastic. In the current era of God's domain, the various kingdoms and empires already had a lockdown on Tier 3 legacies. They treated Tier 3 legacies as priceless treasures, and outsiders like players shouldn't even think of referring to these legacies. The only option players had for reaching Tier 3 was to search for the lost and fragmented Tier 3 legacies hidden in level 100+ neutral maps. Yet, Shi Feng was telling them that they could get their hands on complete Tier 3 legacies. How could she possibly believe this? Is what you say true, Guild Leader Black Flame? Illusory Words had to ask. If the Secret Covenant Tower were only good for providing players with a faster leveling speed, it wouldn't have too significant an impact on a superpower like Crimson Emperor. This was because tiers were everything in God's domain. Levels were only secondary. However, the various superpowers were currently already having trouble with the Tier 3 promotion quest, let alone the elusive Tier 4 promotion quest. In fact, the difficulty of the Tier 3 promotion was so high that the various superpowers were using the number of Tier 3 players they had as a comparison of strength. If what Shi Feng said was true and the Secret Covenant Tower contained complete Tier 3 legacies, then this was an incredibly astonishing matter. If news of this matter leaked out, it would most likely send the entire God's domain into an uproar. After all, despite many players having reached level 100 already, the players that had completed their Tier 3 promotions were still incredibly rare. If one could get a complete Tier 3 class legacy, then completing the promotion quest for the specified class would become significantly easier. This was why NPCs had a much easier time reaching Tier 3 than players. If the difficulty of players' Tier 3 promotion quests were reduced, the number of players successfully reaching Tier 3 would definitely skyrocket. You can personally verify this matter afterward, Shi Feng said, chuckling. However, we must first decide whether we will cooperate or not. Unyielding Soul will do it. Unyielding Heart said without hesitation. Crimson Emperor naturally won't miss this opportunity either, Illusory Words said, nodding. However, she then continued worriedly, but with only our 3 guilds, I'm afraid it will still be very difficult to seal off Sky Spring City, let alone concealing the Secret Covenant Tower's true secret. Cordoning off an NPC city was a challenging endeavor, as players could freely teleport into NPC cities. Players like themselves were powerless to prevent this. At most, they could keep players inside the city from leaving through the main gate and kill anyone that insisted on doing so. However, aside from the main gate, players had other means to exit an NPC city. One example would be a teleportation scroll like what Shi Feng used. The second problem was the matter of the Secret Covenant Tower containing complete Tier 3 legacies. If Unyielding Soul and Crimson Emperor dispatched a lot of manpower to hunt for legacies, the superpower spies planted in their 2 guilds would very quickly find out about the secret. At that time, cordoning off Sky Spring City would become even more of a challenge. In fact, it might even become impossible. Tip, you can rest assured on this point. Since you agree to cooperate, what follows next is simple. Shi Feng said, chuckling. He then took out a pale gold token and explained, "This is Sky Spring City's guild token. Zero Wing has already garrisoned Sky Spring City and gained a portion of the city's management rights." A portion of the city's management rights? Illusory Words' eyes widened in shock as she looked at the guild token. NPCs managed the NPC cities of the various kingdoms and empires. Hence, any guild that successfully acquired even a small portion of an NPC city's management rights would have a solid hold over the city. Other guilds would have no way of wresting control over the city away from the ruling guild. In other words, Sky Spring City was already Zero Wing's possession. So, this is the privilege an official guild receives from garrisoning a city? Unyielding Heart looked at the token in Shi Feng's hand with envy. He had to admit that this privilege was truly amazing. With this privilege, it was only a matter of time before Zero Wing surpassed its rival guilds. While a guild city indeed possessed excellent development potential, NPC cities still dominated the current god's domain. Travel between NPC cities was incredibly convenient. Moreover, NPC cities all had shops and auction houses that sold the essentials that the various powers and independent players couldn't do without. Thoroughly occupying an NPC city meant acquiring a gold mine with a steady income and no need to manage the city to obtain such significant income. This was something the various superpowers dreamed of having. That's right. This is a privilege for guilds officially recognized by the War God's Temple, Shi Feng said, not bothering to hide the truth. With this token I can enact a magic ban over Sky Spring City, preventing the use of any teleportation tools within it. This way players can only walk if they wish to exit the city. In addition, for the sake of keeping the Secret Covenant Tower's Tier 3 legacies a secret, our 3 guilds should rely on only our main force members to hunt for the legacies. To begin with, it's pointless to have a large number of players hunt for them. Ordinary Tier 3 teams can't even survive on the lower floors, let alone search for the complete legacies. Of course, it's impossible to keep this secret forever. However, at this stage of the game, I wish to keep it hidden as long as possible. Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart nodded in agreement. They, too, felt that this was the only way they could go about doing things. So long as their guilds acquired complete Tier 3 legacies, they would already have a significant lead over the other superpowers. And the longer they could keep this secret hidden, the greater the benefits they could reap from it. "Let's sign a contract then," Shi Feng said as he pulled out 2 guild contracts. Initially, Shi Feng had wanted to invite the Secret Pavilion as well. However, the Secret Pavilion was a business-oriented guild and always held itself detached from the struggles between guilds. If the Secret Pavilion suddenly cordoned off an entire NPC city, it would create a huge commotion. In other words, it would seem quite abnormal. Hence, Unyielding Soul and Crimson Emperor were much more suitable for this partnership. After all, the 2 guilds were currently in a weakened position. Cordoning off an entire NPC city for the sake of acquiring more resources would be very normal for them. Even if the other superpowers found out that the 2 guilds' objective was the Secret Covenant Tower, the superpowers would, at most, think that the tower provided players with faster leveling. As for permanently cordoning off Sky Spring City, Shi Feng had never intended to do that. Zero Wing was in dire need of funds. Cordoning off Sky Spring City to allow the guild to gain some advantages might be fine in the short term, but sealing off the city forever would be unprofitable. Fortunately, although it would be impossible to earn money off other players and powers while Sky Spring City was cordoned off, the income from Unyielding Soul and Crimson Emperor would still be considerable. After all, both Unyielding Soul and Crimson Emperor had guild residences in Silverwing City. Compared to teleporting to Sky Spring City from the NPC cities of other kingdoms and empires, which would cost a minimum of 4 gold, it only cost a little over 1 gold per person to teleport from Silverwing City. Meanwhile, Zero Wing would get half of the profits generated by Silverwing City's teleportation hall. At that time, Zero Wing would earn a bunch in teleportation fees and entrance fees from Unyielding Soul and Crimson Emperor. After all, the 2 guilds would be sending a lot of players to the Secret Covenant Tower to level up. This income would easily offset the loss Zero Wing suffered from barring NPCs from its guild cities. Nevertheless, raking in money from the 2 guilds wasn't a long-term plan, as both guilds had limited players and coins. Afterward, Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart signed a guild contract with Shi Feng on behalf of their respective guilds. The terms of the contract were simple. Unyielding Soul and Crimson Emperor would help with cordoning off Sky Spring City from the outside. And aside from their main force members, The two guilds' other members were prohibited from visiting the secret Covenant Tower's 30th underground floor and beyond until the tower's secret had been discovered. Unyielding Soul and Crimson Emperor would also share the magic crystal cost of maintaining Sky Spring City's magic ban. This condition was incredibly disadvantageous for the two guilds. They were basically contributing both manpower and resources. However, Unyielding Heart and Illusory Words did not voice any opinions about this condition. After all, Shi Feng had given their two guilds an opportunity to surpass the other superpowers. Moreover, Zero Wing could still partner with other superpowers. On the other hand, their two guilds had only Zero Wing. After the three signed a contract with each other, Illusory Words and the others promptly returned to their respective guilds to brief their guild executives. At the same time, they also began making the necessary preparations to cordon off Sky Spring City and send personnel into the secret Covenant Tower. This matter was of utmost importance to their two guilds, so they had no choice but to be incredibly careful in their actions. It would also take some time to fully cordon off Sky Spring City. Likewise, Shi Feng had Fire Dance, Yulan, and the others prepare for the secret Covenant Tower. After seeing that there was nothing left for him to do, he chose to go offline to rest. Although staying logged into the game for more than 24 hours wouldn't cause him any harm, he still had to do his daily exercises. Zero Wing's headquarters, top floor lounge. By the time Shi Feng returned to the real world, the sun outside was already illuminating the entire room. It was close to noon. Guild leader, you're finally out. Liang Jing suddenly contacted Shi Feng. In a slightly joyful tone, she said, Miss Muxin has been waiting in the reception room for quite some time now. She says she's here to deliver all the things agreed upon previously. Moreover, she is also going to give Zero Wing a 300 million capital injection at no cost. 300 million credits. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. With this much money, Zero Wing could survive for quite some time even without selling coins for credits. She sure came quickly. Shi Feng was startled by the speed. He had anticipated having to wait for a few days. After all, the remuneration Frost Heaven promised Zero Wing was significant. The 3 upper zone reserve slots aside, just the 50 bottles of S-rank nutrient fluid should take Frost Heaven quite some time to gather. Do you want to meet her now? Liang Jing asked. Of course. Shi Feng nodded. Let me clean up first. I'll head over as soon as I'm done. Chapter 2739, Upper Zone Zero Wing's headquarters, top floor lounge. After Shi Feng finished tidying up, he made his way to the lounge. Upon entering the room, he noticed 2 girls sitting by the window and enjoying the scenery outside. Of the 2 girls, the elder one was Muxin, whom Shi Feng had met quite a few times now. Muxin wore a purple cyan one-piece dress. Like the summer sun, she exuded an indescribable warmth. Her aura in the real world was quite unlike the solemn aura she had in God's domain. The younger girl, sitting beside Muxin, wore a white sweatshirt and a pair of jeans. Although the younger girl gave off a sense of purity and sassiness, her petite figure only made her look like a little girl pretending to be an adult. This younger girl was someone else Shi Feng had met in God's domain before. She was Kurue Muxin's younger sister. Shi Feng, you finally decided to show up. Do you know how long you made us wait here? Kurue said, her face full of resentment as she looked at Shi Feng. Don't listen to her. We didn't wait very long, Muxin said, shaking her head. My sister and I can also take advantage of this time to relax and appreciate the city scenery in the outside world. And from what I've seen thus far, I have to say that this is quite an enjoyable feeling. Muxin's words confused Shi Feng a little. Appreciate the outside world city scenery? All right. I haven't told you about it yet. Noticing the confusion on Shi Feng's face, Muxin smiled faintly and said, My sister and I have always lived in the upper zone, and we very rarely come out from there. I see. Shi Feng nodded. However, Muxin's answer only served to confuse him further. Miss Muxin, is there no urban landscape inside the upper zone? All upper zones were established in first-tier megacities. Logically, urban landscapes should be very common in such cities. In fact, the scenery these megacities offered should be much more spectacular than what was visible from Zero Wing's headquarters. You'll understand once you visit the upper zone, Muxin said, a friendly smile appearing on her face. The upper zone is different from other places. Although Uncle Hong has given you the reserve slots, you still need to register with the upper zone first before you can enter. However, you're probably unfamiliar with the upper zone, so Uncle Hong sent me to escort you so that you can avoid any unnecessary troubles. That's right. If you don't have the guidance of veterans like us, You'll face a lot of trouble once you enter the upper zone, Kurue said delightedly. You might even get kicked out of the upper zone because of a single mistake. Mushin did not refute Kurue's words. Looking at Mushin, Shi Feng said, I'll have to trouble you then? It's no trouble. Mushin shook her head. She then continued softly, it is only thanks to you that Frost Heaven has managed to become a reserve guild. After saying so, Mushin picked up the black briefcase beside her seat. There are 50 bottles of S-rank nutrient fluid here. You should store them well, Mushin said after opening the briefcase. She then warned, however, while the S-rank nutrient fluid is indeed an excellent product, it's best to avoid overusing it as it is still incomplete. It isn't a finished product? Shi Feng was surprised by this revelation. The S-rank nutrient fluid was something countless people fought to obtain. Just the fact that it could maintain a person's youth was already unbelievable. Yet, this drug wasn't actually a finished product? That's right. It isn't a finished product, so you should drink as little of it as possible, Kurue said, nodding. She then continued in a surprisingly soft voice, as you're about to enter the upper zone, there are some things you are allowed to know now. The S-rank nutrient fluid is only a defective product. However, as it indeed has amazing effects on the human body, the Green God Company sells it in small quantities. Nonetheless, in the upper zones, drinking it isn't recommended. Mushin nodded in support of Kurue's words. Thus far, Kurue and I have drunk only 2 or 3 bottles of S-rank nutrient fluids because of special circumstances. Uncle Hong even severely warned us and banned us from drinking more. Uncle Hong isn't someone who would harm us, so you should also be careful when using the S-rank nutrient fluid, Mushin said earnestly. Upon hearing this, Shi Feng couldn't help becoming a little wary of the S-rank nutrient fluid. He then said, I understand. I'll have my people drink as little of it as possible. If even the upper zone advised its residents against drinking the S-rank nutrient fluid, then there were definitely problems with this product. However, as to what exactly these problems were, most likely only a small number of people knew. Fortunately, aside from himself, everyone else in the guild hadn't consumed a significant amount of S-rank nutrient fluids. Now that our matters here are settled, since her elder sister had already transferred the S-rank nutrient fluids to Shi Feng, Kurue said excitedly, let's go to the upper zone. We're going there now? Shi Feng was a little stunned. The upper zones were established only in certain first-tier cities, which were several hours of flight away. At this time, half the day had gone by already. Of course. We have a supersonic jet ready, Kurue said nonchalantly. If we miss today's opportunity, it'll be very troublesome to schedule another appointment. Kurue is right. Although Uncle Hong has given you the status required to enter the upper zone, entering it isn't easy. Since our matters here have been concluded, we should head over immediately, Mushin said in agreement. Okay. I'll make some arrangements here and go with you afterward, Shi Feng said without much hesitation. After all, he too wanted to visit the upper zone. Not to mention, Gentle Snow and Aqua Rosa's situation wasn't exactly optimistic. If left alone for too long, they might even fall into a coma. Moreover, during his previous life, the upper zone was a place that even the executives of the various super first-rate guilds and first-rate guilds yearned to live in. As for the guild leader of a second-rate guild like himself, visiting the upper zone was something he never even dared to dream about. Mushin being willing to escort him to an upper zone was naturally to his advantage. After Shi Feng passed on his guild affairs to Liangjing, he went to the airport with Mushin and Kurue. During their journey, Shi Feng had to admit that the Boulder Corporation was indeed wealthy and influential. With the corporation's private supersonic jet, a trip that should have originally taken several hours on an ordinary airplane was completed in just 1 hour. At the end of the flight, the trio found themselves in Yuantian City, one of only 3 first-tier megacities within the country to house an upper zone. While crossing the city districts on a high-class maglev train, Shi Feng couldn't help lamenting ruefully. As a megacity with a population of more than 100 million, Yuantian City far outstripped other cities in terms of prosperity. It was also one of the cities Shi Feng had always wished to develop Zero Wing in, as it had many important resources rarely found in the outside world. In fact, almost all super first-rate guilds and super guilds operating in the virtual gaming industry had their headquarters in cities hosting an upper zone. This was because the upper zones would occasionally release some of its resources to the outside world. The various corporations based in the megacities hosting the upper zones would quickly divide these resources among themselves, and very rarely would any of these resources leave the city limits. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that only corporations that had set roots in an upper zone city could be considered a truly top-tier corporation. The road before Zero Wing was still very long. Meanwhile, after traveling inside the city for close to an hour and passing through many tunnels, Mushin parked the car in a vast area surrounded by steel walls. She then pointed at a huge door nearby and said, "We're here." After saying so, Mushin got out of the car and led Shi Feng to the huge door. B0/B, the upper zone is beyond this thing? Shi Feng was amazed as he took in the 50-meter-tall stone door and the energy walls that enveloped the space above the enclosure. In his previous life he had only ever heard about the upper zone, and the information hadn't been much. Now that he was looking at one himself, he could only describe the upper zone as a titanic building made entirely of steel. "Let's go in," Kurue said to Shi Feng. As she pointed at the passageway underneath the huge door and a line of several dozen people entering it, she beamed at him and continued, "However, you have to be careful once you enter. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World." Is there something special about it?" Shi Feng asked, confused. "You'll understand once you go in," Kurue said, her smile growing even brighter when she saw the confusion on Shi Feng's face. "However, you'd best be mentally prepared. Once you go inside you won't have a chance to return to your own world." Afterward, Kurue stopped speaking and walked toward the passageway. Mushin had remained silent all the while. However, after a moment, Mushin took a deep breath and looked at Shi Feng. She then said earnestly, "Although Kurue is right, there are unimaginable opportunities available in the upper zone. If you can prosper inside, even the various international corporations will have to treat you with respect. Anyway, time is almost up. Let's enter as well." Chapter 2740 Mental Path. Shi Feng also deeply agreed with Mushin's reminder. In fact, he had a much better understanding than Mushin and Kurue did of how special and different the upper zone was, compared to the outside world. In his previous life, aside from the various powers of God's domain, any expert that successfully reached Tier 5 would, for some reason, yearn to enter the upper zone. Their yearning could even be described as fanaticism. That kind of fanaticism wasn't something Mushin and Kurue could understand. Back then, those people were truly willing to risk their lives to enter the upper zone. Extending one's lifespan by living in the upper zone was indeed a very tempting matter. In fact, it was something even the various major corporations would fight desperately to obtain. However, back then Shi Feng could tell that those Tier 5 experts weren't risking their lives just to extend their lifespans. Instead, it was as if something in the upper zone was attracting experts of such caliber. Thus, many Tier 5 experts and even Tier 6 God-ranked experts in God's domain had abruptly gone missing, their fate unknown. One of the most well-known people among those who disappeared was Violet Cloud. As a Tier 6 cleric god, Violet Cloud had been in existence even the various super guilds had a headache dealing with. In the past, in order to enter the upper zone, Violet Cloud had agreed to the harsh conditions of a super guild. After completing these conditions, she had entered the upper zone. However, she had also disappeared from God's domain from then on. Hence, whether it was Kurue's warning or Mushin's reminder, Shi Feng still wished to take a look at what exactly the upper zone was. When Shi Feng arrived before the entrance of the dark passageway, there were already several dozen people lined up there. These people were equally split between genders, and none of them looked to be over 20 years old, with the youngest one looking to be only 16 years old. Meanwhile, despite the arrival of beauties like Mushin and Kurue, these people practically ignored the two. Instead, they all focused on Shi Feng, who was wearing casual sportswear. Another newcomer arrived. Judging by his appearance, he didn't come prepared at all. He's definitely another one of those despicable bastards that got in through connections. Don't let him hear you. We can't afford to offend such people. When Shi Feng overheard the conversation of the teenage boys and girls with his sharp senses, he was rather baffled. Meanwhile, Kurue, who stood beside Shi Feng, nearly laughed at his situation but managed to restrain herself in the end. However, her lips still formed a shallow arc. "You don't need to mind them," Mushin said to Shi Feng as she glanced at the teenagers. "They're here to participate in the assessment for entering the upper zone." Assessment for entering the upper zone? Shi Feng was slightly surprised. This was his first time to hear of this. As far as he knew, the only reliable way for an outsider without connections to enter the upper zone was through recruitment by the Green God Company as a talent. Unlike what you would expect, the upper zone isn't limited to just people with authority, Mushin explained. The upper zone is also where the Green God Company nurtures its internal talents. These youngsters are all talents who have passed the Green God Company's preliminary tests. So long as they pass this assessment, they will also gain entry into the upper zone. However, this assessment is only available to talents under the age of 20. Talents past this age can only work outside. As for the assessment's content, it is simply to get through this passageway and enter the upper zone. Pass through this passageway? Shi Feng asked in confusion as he pointed at the dark tunnel ahead. That's right. This passage is nicknamed the mental path, and it tests and tempers a person's mental strength. The mental path is normally closed, so it doesn't have any significant effect on people. However, when the mental path is activated, only 3 to 5 people get through it every year. Very few among those who participate in the Green God Company's test actually pass it, Mushin said, nodding. However, so long as one passes the test, not only will they receive priority training from the Green God Company, but they will also receive a significant reward. Kurue nodded in agreement with Mushin's words. She then said pridefully to Shi Feng, I passed this mental path last year. Big Sis is even more of a genius and she passed it at the age of 15. She caused quite a sensation in Yuantian City's upper zone back then. While Mushin was giving Shi Feng an explanation, a young man walked out of the passageway. This man wore a tight-fitting t-shirt that thoroughly revealed his skeletal structure and muscles. His physique was elegant and full of power like a cheetah's. However, despite his apparent youth, his aura suggested that he had experienced the vicissitudes of life. It was evident he wasn't as young as he looked. Upon noticing this man's arrival, the teenagers, Mushin and Kurue, promptly tensed up. Huh? Another newcomer? The young man was slightly surprised when his gaze fell on Shi Feng. Supervisor Luo, you misunderstand. He is here to register. He's not an examinee, Mushin explained. Oh, so Hong Xinyuan gave his reserve slot to him? Suddenly, a trace of disgust flashed in the young man's eyes as he took a second glance at Shi Feng. What a lucky kid. However, the Green God Company is conducting an assessment today. If you want to enter, you'll have to go with these youngsters. I don't have the time to shut down the passageway again. Mushin frowned when she heard the young man's words. It was no secret that Luo Hanbing and Hong Xinyuan were rivals in the upper zone. However, she never thought that Luo Hanbing would use this opportunity to publicly retaliate against Hong Xinyuan. One needed to make an appointment to register with the upper zone. Normally, waiting several months for an appointment wouldn't be strange. This time, it was only thanks to Hong Xinyuan's connections that Shi Feng could get registered so soon. However, if he didn't register today, he would have to wait for several months for another opportunity to do so. Meanwhile, those unregistered with the upper zone wouldn't be able to live there. Supervisor Luo, he is someone with a reserve slot. He has the right to freely enter the upper zone. Mushin said in a low tone to express her dissatisfaction. I never said I was stopping him from entering, Luo Hanbing sneered. He can enter whenever he wants. If he can't enter now, he can just enter tomorrow. As soon as Luo Hanbing finished speaking, the teenage examinees nearby nodded in agreement. That's right. The passageway is always open. Since he already has identification in the upper zone, can't he enter whenever he wants? Supervisor Luo is right. If he can't enter now, he can just enter tomorrow. Why must he compete with newcomers like us? The teenage newcomers instinctively despised people who entered the upper zone through connections. After all, they had gone through great difficulties to reach this point. They even had to walk through the activated mental path to secure identification in the upper zone. In comparison, Shi Feng could obtain identification without having to do anything. He made their efforts look like a joke. Kurue also couldn't help glaring at the supervisor surnamed Luo. She then whispered to Mushin saying, Big Sis, why don't we come back at another date? That bastard clearly won't let us in today. As one of the upper zone's supervisors, Luo Hanbing wielded greater authority in the upper zone than Hong Xinyuan. Even if they reported this matter to their uncle, they wouldn't be able to do anything about this situation. After all, Luo Hanbing's actions were not completely unreasonable. Alright, if you don't want to enter, don't get in the way, Luo Hanbing said impatiently. The newcomer assessment this time is very important. If it gets delayed, even Hong Xinyuan won't be able to bear the consequences. However, just as Mushin wanted to say something, a voice suddenly entered everyone's ears. Supervisor Luo, so we can enter right away? The owner of this voice was none other than Shi Feng, who had remained silent all this time. Shi Feng. Mushin stared at Shi Feng in stupefaction. She never thought Shi Feng would actually consider challenging the mental path. Let alone Mushin, even Luo Hanbing and the others were surprised. "Kid, it seems you're quite bold," Luo Hanbing said as he looked at Shi Feng. Chuckling, he continued, "Go on in then. However, let me give you a warning. You're not an examinee, so even if you lose consciousness inside, nobody will come to rescue you. If you stay inside for too long, it wouldn't be strange if you end up hospitalized for a few months. Don't mess around, Shi Feng. The mental path has a limit. It's several times more difficult for those over the age of 20. This is why the Green God Company has set the assessment's age limit at below 20 years old," Mushin said hurriedly. Not many people knew this, but the Green God Company had previously allowed people over 20 years old but under 25 years old to participate in the assessment as well. However, not a single person from this age group had managed to pass the assessment. As a result, the company limited the assessment to only people under the age of 20. Meanwhile, Luo Hanbing also knew this point, which was why he was certain they wouldn't be able to enter the upper zone today. "Relax. If it doesn't work out, I'll give up and come back immediately," Shi Feng assured, chuckling. Tests of mental strength were considered fortuitous opportunities in God's domain. After all, the promotion quest for Tier 4 and above set an incredibly high requirement for players' mental strength. Meanwhile, after Shi Feng's concentration had reached the Tier 4 standard, he had hit a bottleneck and failed to make further progress. With such an opportunity before him, he naturally had to give it a try. After saying so, Shi Feng walked straight into the dark tunnel, leaving behind Mushin, who remained in a daze. "Alright, you newcomers, head in as well. Remember, you have only 1 hour." At Luo Hanbing's words, the newcomers promptly took deep breaths. Only after adjusting their mental state to its peak condition did they enter the passageway one after another. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. "You big sis, what should we do?" Kurue was also at a loss in this situation. She never thought Shi Feng would be so courageous. Previously, when she told Shi Feng to be careful when he entered the upper zone, she meant for him to be careful of the mental path. After all, even when inactive, the mental path significantly affected people older than 20. If he wasn't careful, he might end up fainting. Yet now, Shi Feng was walking straight into the fully activated mental path. "The mental path is too dangerous for me," Mushin said anxiously. After giving the matter some thought, she said, "You should go after him. If it looks like he can't hold on any longer, bring him back immediately." "Ah, what a troublesome guy. Does he think he is still in God's domain?" Kurue grumbled somewhat unhappily. However, in consideration of the overall situation, Kurue still entered the passageway. Chapter 2741, Steel Mind. Inside the dark passageway, Shi Feng walked for 5 minutes before he finally arrived at a brightly lit hall. The hall was the size of a basketball court and undecorated. The fluorescence from the walls brightly illuminated the entire hall. When walking into this hall, Shi Feng felt as if he had just entered a white space. Is that the mental path they were talking about? Shi Feng was slightly stunned when he saw the staircase leading downward at the other end of the hall. The reason for his surprise was the niggling feeling of familiarity this staircase gave him, yet he couldn't remember where he had seen it before. The staircase was made entirely of white, jade-like stones. It evoked a sense of sanctity and comfort that resembled the winter sun and the summer breeze. Moreover, this sensation grew increasingly stronger the closer he got to the staircase. He even had the urge to dash toward it. The moment Shi Feng set foot on the white staircase, an indescribable comfort spread throughout his body. For a moment he felt as if he had been reborn. However, immediately afterward he felt as if someone had just smashed a hammer straight into his brain. His thoughts became paralyzed momentarily, and he felt as if his soul was about to leave his body. He even staggered as he briefly lost control over his body. So, this is the mental path? After backing up into the hall, Shi Feng stared at the white staircase in disbelief. The strength of its mental assaults is even more frightening than Lightforge City's divine statues. No wonder the Green God Company set the age limit to below 20. If the divine will of Lightforge City's divine statues were equated to a storm that attacked one's whole body, then the white staircase's mental assault was a hammer that struck accurately and ruthlessly at the deepest part of one's brain. The penetrative power of the white staircase's mental assault was far above that of the divine will. During the time Shi Feng was marveling at the staircase's mental assault, the Green God Company's newcomers had entered the hall one after another. That person is still here as expected. Of course. Does he think the mental path is so easy to traverse? If it were that easy, there wouldn't only be 3 to 5 people gaining identification in the upper zone every year, but thousands instead. I wonder how far I can get this time? When the newcomers saw Shi Feng standing idly before the mental path, they didn't find his reaction surprising at all. When they first set foot on the white staircase, they too had been shocked by its power. Moreover, the staircase's mental assault truly hurt. It hurt so badly that they couldn't even scream. If possible, they wouldn't want to experience such a feeling a second time. However, someone among the new arrivals this time might actually make it through, a 19-year-old girl in white clothes said. Looking at the white staircase, she sighed ruefully and continued, "In comparison, this is my last chance. If I don't get through this time, I can only mingle in the city." "You're talking about that special enrollment, right?" a long-haired girl of similar age said as she looked at a 17-year-old boy with short hair nearby. "How frustrating. The company recruited him just a few months ago, yet he can already participate in the assessment. The company's executives have a high opinion of him. It really makes you wonder if his head is made of stone. He actually shows no reaction to the mental assaults." "Who else?" the white-shirted girl retorted. When she looked at the skinny, short-haired boy, indescribable envy filled her eyes. "If I had half his talent, I might be able to pass the assessment this time. People like him are bound to become internal members of the company. His looks are fine too." Licking her lips, the long-haired girl said, "I heard he still doesn't have a girlfriend. If we seize this opportunity, we might have a chance to enter the upper zone as well." As the two girls whispered to each other, the boy in question stepped onto the white staircase. The next moment, the boy descended the staircase one step after another at a uniform speed. From beginning to end, he showed no response to the staircase's mental assaults. It was as if the mental assaults didn't even exist. The boy's calm performance immediately took the breaths of the newcomers inside the hall. No way. He really isn't reacting at all. Is his brain made of metal? When the lanky youth remained unfazed even after descending over 100 meters, both the newcomers in the hall and Shi Feng couldn't help their surprise. With such a performance, his concentration standard should be at Tier 4 already. Shi Feng already had a clear grasp of the white staircase's mental assaults. If the mental assault he suffered were several times weaker, it would roughly match the divine statue's mental assault. However, the short-haired boy actually remained unfazed by such a mental assault. This showed that the mental assault's intensity was well within the limit of the boy's mental fortitude. Even Violet Cloud did not possess such frightening mental fortitude. Shocked, right? Kurue, who had just arrived in the hall, giggled as she looked at the short-haired youths departing back. "I already told you to be careful. This mental path isn't as simple as you think it is. As for that boy you saw, he's Yan Wuming, a peerless talent the Green God Company went to great lengths to discover. The company considers him the best talent of the past few decades. Even my elder sister is far behind him." "Yan Wuming?" Shi Feng suddenly recalled something. "He is that Yan Wuming?" "That's right. He's Yan Wuming. What's the matter?" Kurue was confused as she looked at Shi Feng's surprised expression. "I see. So that's why his concentration standard is so high." Shi Feng chuckled. Everyone in God's domain had known Yan Wuming's nickname in the past. Invincible Swallow. He was a master among magical classes, and he could cast spells as easily as speaking. He was an overlord of magic, and he had fought countless PvP battles without suffering defeat during his career in God's domain. Even the old monsters of the various super guilds couldn't last more than 3 exchanges against him. When Invincible Swallow was at his peak, only Tier 6 God-ranked experts who were 1 tier above him stood a chance against him. Only the number of Tier 6 God-ranked experts in the game at that time could still be counted on the fingers of one hand. Moreover, all of them were incredibly elusive, and finding even one was a challenging task, let alone dueling one. Meanwhile, after Invincible Swallow reached Tier 6, he suddenly disappeared without a trace. Nobody knew the reason for his disappearance either. Invincible Swallow's disappearance had caused a great commotion back then. Rumor had it that even the Green God Company had frantically searched for him. However, he remained missing. This is interesting. Shi Feng never thought that he would actually meet the legendary Invincible Swallow here today. "You're not thinking of challenging the mental path, are you?" Kurue was stunned when she saw Shi Feng's mood suddenly brightening. She had a strong suspicion that the mental path had driven Shi Feng crazy. "Challenge?" Shi Feng shook his head. "I don't plan on challenging it. I just plan to take a look inside the upper zone." "Is there a difference?" Kurui was a little puzzled. If Shi Feng didn't cross the mental path today, he shouldn't even think of entering the upper zone. Of course there is. Taking a deep breath, Shi Feng said, "It means I don't intend to bear the mental assaults anymore." Kurui grew even more confused. Were mental assaults something one could avoid confronting just because one wished it? However, Shi Feng did not make any additional explanations. He immediately stepped onto the white staircase. Previously, he had used a trick to absorb the divine will of the divine statues to improve his concentration. This time he also planned to use a similar trick. Only, the white staircase's mental assault had also given him some new ideas. And that was how to enhance his mental control. Since the white staircase's mental assaults possessed great penetrative power, he would gather all his focus into a single point instead of elevating his control over his whole body. He would turn his mind into steel and defend only the deepest part of his brain. The next moment, Shi Feng took his first step on the white staircase and paused. However, unlike before, his expression did not change at all. There was no dissonance in his body either. He simply stood there quietly. Success. Shi Feng's eyes widened in delight. However, this state also deprives me of all control over my body. It seems that I still have to retain a small part of my focus to control my body and concentrate the rest on shielding my mind from these mental assaults. Afterward, Shi Feng took another step forward. Clang. A faint jangle echoed in Shi Feng's mind. However, not only did the hammer-like mental assault fail to shake the depths of his mind, but his body didn't even twitch in the slightest. It works, but adapting to this state isn't going to be easy. Shi Feng couldn't help smiling bitterly at the heaviness of his body. This was his first time using only a small amount of mental power to control his body. Right now, he felt as if he was hovering between consciousness and unconsciousness. His body also felt incredibly ponderous. However, after taking several steps, Shi Feng began to have a better grasp of this state. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Meanwhile, from an outsider's perspective, Shi Feng looked as if he was descending an ordinary staircase. He showed no reaction whatsoever to the white staircase's mental assaults. Moreover, his speed of descent was even increasing as time passed. In less than a minute, Shi Feng overtook Yan Wuming. The distance between the two even kept growing afterward. How is this possible? Kurui's eyes nearly fell out of their sockets when she saw Shi Feng practically flying down the staircase. Is he immune to the mental assaults similar to how Yan Wuming is? As for the other newcomers in the hall, they were even more dumbfounded by this situation. None of them dared believe their eyes. In the end, Shi Feng spent less than 15 minutes traversing the mental path. When he reached the goal, melodious bells rang and echoed throughout the upper zone. Chapter 2742, Grade 1 Authority Upper Zone, Outside the Mental Path. Upon hearing the peal of melodious bells, both Luo Hanbing and Mu Xin revealed surprised looks on their faces. It's been less than 20 minutes since they went inside, yet someone's already passed the assessment? Mu Xin's surprise at the sound of the bell was inevitable. The mental path was an incredibly important aspect of the upper zone. Whenever someone successfully passed the activated mental path, bells would be rung to notify everyone in the upper zone of the achievement. The mental path's bell's peal proved that someone had cleared it already. However, the speed at which they cleared it was simply unbelievable. Usually it would take a person over 30 minutes to traverse the mental path. After all, the staircase's length wasn't exactly short. Even a person walking at a normal pace would take 30 minutes to descend it. Not to mention, every step a person took on the mental path would trigger an intense mental assault. Good. A clear time of less than 20 minutes. It seems the higher-ups were right about that kid. He really is a monster. Luo Hanbing grinned in satisfaction. The price I paid to become the guide for this assessment was truly worth it. As the invigilator for the assessment, the more excellent the newcomers that appeared under his watch, the higher his evaluation with the higher-ups. Moreover, as the guide for the assessment qualifiers, he would have a much easier time recruiting the qualified newcomers. If he could rope a peerless genius like Yan Wuming to his side, his status in Yuantian City's upper zone would also rise. Meanwhile, Mu Xin, who similarly realized this matter, revealed an ugly expression on her face. If Luo Hanbing enlisted a mental monster like Yan Wuming to his side, his status in the upper zone would most likely surpass Hong Xinyuan's. After a few more minutes went by, the mental path's bells rang once more. Another person passed? Mu Xin was stunned when she heard the bells. Simultaneously, her complexion darkened even further. The bells of Yuantian City's upper zone rang only a handful of times each year. Yet the bells had rung twice today. This was a situation that didn't occur even once in a decade. Yet, Luo Hanbing had actually chanced upon this day. Ah! Amazing. The newcomers this time are truly amazing. Luo Hanbing burst into laughter. He then glanced at Muxin and said, Muxin, you're one of the famous geniuses in Yuantian City's upper zone. You won't have a future if you keep following old Hong. How about you join me? You might even raise your mental strength by a rank in the next 1 or 2 years if you join me. At that time your authority in the upper zone will also be elevated to grade 1. Thank you for your offer, Supervisor Luo, but I'm doing very well following Uncle Hong. I believe it won't be long before I raise my authority to grade 1. Muxin rejected Luo Hanbing's offer without hesitation. Luo Hanbing was not at all surprised by Muxin's refusal. He said nonchalantly, once behind, always behind. I hope you don't regret your decision today. What the upper zone prioritized the most was a person's mental strength. In fact, mental strength determined a person's status in the upper zone. The stronger one's mental strength, the greater the authority one would enjoy in the upper zone, hence the more the resources one could obtain. However, developing one's mental state was incredibly difficult. Moreover, the older one became, the slower one's growth would be. Take Muxin for example. She had cleared the mental path at the age of 15. Back then she was judged to possess advanced mental strength. However, as she wasn't an internal member of the Green God Company, she was only granted grade 2 authority, which was one level lower than that of internal members with the same mental strength standard. Back then, the other individuals unaffiliated with the Green God Company who had passed the mental path had been granted only grade 3 authority. Unfortunately, even after so many years, Muxin's mental strength had not improved by much. As a result, she remained at grade 2 authority even today. However, if Muxin could improve herself and reach grade 1 authority, her status in the upper zone would undergo a qualitative transformation. Fewer than 200 people held grade 1 authority in Yuantian City's upper zone. Even Luo Hanbing, a supervisor in the upper zone, only held advanced rank authority, 1 rank higher than grade 1 authority. After that exchange, Luo Hanbing stopped speaking to Muxin. In Luo Hanbing's opinion, Muxin was basically deadwood. With Hong Xinyuan's meager resources, let alone raising Muxin's mental strength standard, even helping Kurue, Muxin's little sister, to the grade 2 standard would be challenging. Following which, time passed quickly. Why haven't they returned yet? Did something happen to Kurue? Muxin looked at the time nervously. While Kurue wasn't immune to the mental path's effects, with her past experiences, she shouldn't have any problem dealing with the mental assaults anymore. The pain inflicted by the mental assaults should be well within her range of tolerance. It's been almost an hour now, yet they still haven't come out. They must have met with an accident, Luo Hanbing said as he glanced at his watch. Sneering, he continued, I warned him that he'd get hospitalized if he wasn't careful. Youngsters nowadays really don't know how to listen to advice. It's a pity, but they'll have to stay in there for a few hours. Did something really happen? Muxin's complexion turned pallid. The mental path's activation and deactivation processes were very tedious. Even someone with special privileges would need 2 or 3 hours to power it down. If Shi Feng and Kurue collapsed and remained in the mental path for such a long period, they would be fortunate to get away with just 1 month of hospitalization. If their condition was serious, they might end up with their future progress cut short. Just when a wave of panic overwhelmed Muxin, the quantum watch on her wrist suddenly rang, notifying her of a call. Meanwhile, the caller was none other than Kurue. Kurue, what's the situation on your side? Muxin couldn't help getting angry when she saw Kurue's face on the screen. Why haven't you come out yet? Sis. That's not important anymore. A major event happened on the mental path. Kurue said excitedly. A major event? What is it? Are you talking about the 2 that passed the mental path? Muxin couldn't help feeling frustrated at Kurue's words. She couldn't believe her little sister was in the mood to care about incidental matters in this situation. Yes, Shi Feng actually passed the mental path. Kurue said, her eyes filled with excitement. Everyone in the hall got a shock. Afterward, I had to hurry through to get to the communication area. I'm dead tired after that trip. Shi Feng passed the mental path? Muxin suddenly felt that her brain was somewhat lacking in processing power. Shi Feng was undoubtedly over 20. Meanwhile, in the history of Yuantian City's upper zone, No one past the age of 20 and under the age of 25 had ever managed to conquer the mental path. MHM. I knew you wouldn't believe me. Here, take a look for yourself. He's here with me, Kurue said as she adjusted the camera angle to capture Shi Feng, as well as Yan Wuming, who was glaring at Shi Feng with eyes brimming with fighting spirit. Bye-bye. We're going to enter the upper zone now. After Kurue finished speaking, she promptly disconnected the call, leaving her elder sister in a daze. Impossible. Luo Hanbing was dumbfounded when he overheard Mushin and Kurue's conversation. That kid is already over 20. How can he possibly get through the mental path? No sooner had Luo Hanbing thought this than a notice popped up on his quantum watch. The next moment, his quantum watch projected a holographic table containing the data of the mental path's qualifiers this time. First, Shi Feng clear time, 13 minutes 41 seconds age, under 25 years old affiliation, non-member mental strength appraisal, special grade upper zone authority, grade 1 second, Yan Wuming clear time, 18 minutes 33 seconds age, under 20 years old affiliation, internal member mental strength appraisal, advanced grade upper zone authority, grade 1 special grade. Mushin was dumbfounded when she saw the tabulated data. Although Shi Feng's performance in God's domain was indeed astonishing, she never imagined his mental strength would be equally astonishing special grade. This was a mental strength she was striving to attain. However, no matter how much effort she put in, she remained far from reaching this standard. At some point, she had even begun losing hope of further progress. Damn it. How could this be? Luo Hanbing's face turned ashen when he saw the results. He had inadvertently offended a monster. Moreover, Shi Feng evidently had deep ties with Hong Xinyuan. Meanwhile, inside the mental path's innermost section, Shi Feng and the others were riding a platform descending deep into the ground. The gravity here is getting stronger? Shi Feng discovered that as he got deeper into the tunnel, the gravity his body experienced intensified. In less than 10 minutes riding the platform, the gravity he experienced had already doubled. After the moving platform exited the tunnel, Shi Feng was immediately dumbfounded. However, his surprise wasn't just because the gravity here was 3 times stronger than that of the outside world. Instead, it was because there was actually a levitating mountain beyond the tunnel. This mountain's radius exceeded 10 kilometers, and there were several levitating escalators leading up to this mountain. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Many tall buildings stood on this levitating mountain. Clouds and mist shrouded its peak, preventing anyone from catching a clear glimpse of it. Overall, the mountain looked like a paradise on earth. Well, stunned, right? The shocked expression on Shi Feng's face delighted Kurue. Anyone visiting the upper zone for the first time would never think that the upper zone would be underground, much less there being such an unimaginably huge space deep underground. Indeed, it is incredible, Shi Feng admitted. He had never heard of or seen such a unique space before. It was no wonder those who knew of the upper zone specifics would be so desperate to live here. Just breathing the air here gave him a refreshing feeling. If he could reside here long-term, achieving longevity indeed wouldn't be a dream. When Kurue saw that the moving platform had stopped at the foot of the mountain, she promptly opened the platform's gate and stepped off the platform. However, when she saw that Shi Feng remained standing idly on the platform, she urged him excitedly, "Quick! You have grade 1 authority now. Let's go to the registration office and take a look. There might be some good rewards waiting for you." Chapter 2743, Astonishing Upper Zone. Shi Feng was curious about the upper zone. Hence, he did not hesitate to respond to Kurue's urging. However, just as he was about to step off the platform, a voice came from behind him. Wait a minute. The owner of this voice was none other than the short-haired youth, Yan Wuming. What do you want? Shi Feng asked, puzzled. Shi Feng was relatively curious about Yan Wuming's existence as well. In the past, Yan Wuming had been a high and mighty existence in God's domain, like a god of war that overlooked all life. Yet now he was only a boy whose eyes blazed with intense fighting spirit as he looked at Shi Feng. What's your name? Yan Wuming asked. Shi Feng, Shi Feng responded curtly. Shi Feng? I'll remember that. Yan Wuming silently repeated Shi Feng's name in his mind several times. He then looked at Shi Feng and said earnestly, although I lost to you in the mental strength competition today, I will quickly reach the special grade standard. I will challenge you again at that time. Challenge me? Shi Feng chuckled. He then shook his head and said, I'm afraid I don't have that kind of time. I'm a busy person. Shi Feng did not lie to the boy. He had to not only resolve Gentle Snow and Aqua Rosa's problem but also attend to plenty of guild affairs as well as quests awaiting completion. Previously he had still lacked strength. However, now that he had reached Tier 4, there were many problems he could begin tackling. Hence, he did not have time for Yan Wuming's challenge. This isn't up to you. Yan Wuming ignored Shi Feng's thoughts. In a sonorous and forceful tone he said, "One of my goals is to be number 1 in Yuantian City's upper zone, and you're my first obstacle. Only after defeating you can I get closer to my goal. It seems you like challenges." Shi Feng wasn't particularly surprised at Yan Wuming's declaration. After giving the matter some thought he said, "How about this? I'll give you one chance to challenge me. So long as you meet my condition you can challenge me at any time. What do you think?" "Say it," Yan Wuming said confidently. "Do you play God's Domain?" Shi Feng asked. "I've been playing it for some time now." Looking at Shi Feng strangely, Yan Wuming asked, "Are you telling me to defeat you in God's Domain?" Kurue, who stood nearby, heard Yan Wuming's words and couldn't help snickering. "You must be confident in yourself, huh? Do you even know who he is? You want to defeat him in God's Domain?" Kurue scoffed at Yan Wuming. "No matter who he is, I will win." Yan Wuming did not waver in the slightest. Although he started having some doubts about Shi Feng's identity, these were all trivial matters. What was most important to him was defeating Shi Feng. "No, you misunderstand." Shi Feng chuckled. "I'm not requiring you to defeat me in God's Domain. You just need to beat a friend of mine." "Sure." Yan Wuming nodded. "Tell me their name. Once I reach Tier 3 I'll beat that friend of yours in no time. Then I'll come to challenge you." "Her name in God's Domain is Violet Cloud." Shi Feng inwardly breathed out a sigh of relief when he heard Yan Wuming agree to his suggestion. "You can head to Silverwing City to look for her. So long as you defeat her I'll accept your challenge." Since a talent like Yan Wuming had come knocking on his door, Shi Feng naturally wouldn't let this opportunity slip by. If he could rope Invincible Swallow into 0 wing, it would be akin to adding wings to a tiger. The overall strength of the guild's top combatants would soar. "No problem. I'll seek her out afterward." Yan Wuming responded without hesitation, his expression still as confident as before. However, after hearing Shi Feng's suggestion, Kurue looked at Yan Wuming with slightly different eyes. Now there was a hint of pity in her gaze. "I hope you don't despair too much when you meet with Violet Cloud," Kurue silently prayed for Yan Wuming. Kurue had witnessed Violet Cloud in action. Even the old monsters of super guilds couldn't outmatch her. In fact, even mythology's divine spear demon only managed to fight her to a draw. At this time, there were most likely only a handful of people capable of defeating Violet Cloud. "Let's go." Shi Feng couldn't help shaking his head and chuckling when he noticed Kurue secretly praying for Yan Wuming. He then walked toward the distant street. When Shi Feng said he would get himself registered now, Kurue's face immediately shone with excitement. She then dragged Shi Feng toward the tallest building, situated at the foot of the mountain. Yan Wuming remained by the platform, waiting for someone to guide him. As Shi Feng walked along the streets on the levitating mountain, he could feel his mind and body being enriched. He also started adapting to the tripled gravity here. So, this is the real upper zone? Shi Feng couldn't help his shock. Ordinary people would have difficulty even moving their bodies under tripled gravity. Shi Feng could shrug off the effects of the higher gravity due to his astonishing physical fitness. Even so, he still felt very uncomfortable in such an environment. However, after stepping onto the mountain, the discomfort disappeared. It was as if there was a special energy source constantly enriching his weakened body. Meanwhile, this steady cycle of exhaustion and replenishment also served to strengthen his physique continually. His arduous physical training regimen in the outside world was basically a joke in the upper zone. If all upper zone residents experienced such strengthening effects, so long as they did not suffer any injuries, they shouldn't have any problems living up to 120 years old. Do you now understand how different the upper zone is from the world you know? Kurue asked, smiling. Everyone living here is growing physically stronger by the moment. Even without intensive training, the physical fitness of people living here can quickly rival that of Hunglian masters. According to the rumors floating about in the outside world, the lifespan of people living in the upper zone has reached 150 years. In reality, that is only the lifespan of those living in the upper zone's base layer. You must have noticed the mountainside and summit as well. Those are the middle and top layers. The people residing there possess truly astonishing physical fitness and lifespans. The average lifespan in the middle layer is 180 years, while in the top layer, it's 200 years. This is already beyond human limits. In ancient times, 200 years was already enough for a change in dynasties. On the other hand, those living at the top would only be entering their prime after reaching 120 years old. Speaking up to this point, Kurue gazed at the mountaintop, full of yearning. The upper zone's houses are stratified? Shi Feng asked strangely. Of course. There is only so much space on this mountain. Even with the Boulder Corporation's wealth and status, we can only live in the base layer. The middle layer isn't a place one can live in just by having wealth and status, Kurue grumbled in frustration. If you want to live in the middle layer, your authority in the upper zone must reach a certain level. For example, you currently already have Grade 1 authority. Grade 1 authority is the highest authority available in the base layer. If you manage to elevate your authority level to advanced grade, you can live in the middle layer. What do you mean by these authority levels? Shi Feng asked in confusion. He roughly understood the purpose of the upper zone's authority levels. However, he still didn't know the exact details. Right, I haven't told you the details yet. After a slight pause, Kurue continued, money and status are the least important things in the upper zone. What's most important is your mental strength and authority level. Authority in the base layer is divided into 3 levels. The higher your authority, the better the items you can buy in exchange from the Green God Company. You can think of the upper zone as the Green God Company's trading market. Grade 3 authority is the lowest, and the items you can purchase at this authority level are also of the most inferior quality. However, it is still many times better than what people without authority can get. At the very least, you have the right to purchase basic housing in the base layer. You won't need to pay astronomical prices to rent a house. After reaching Grade 2 authority, you can purchase items that normally are not available in the outside world. For example, the life potion that only appears during the Green God Company's auctions. At Grade 2 authority, you can also purchase villas in the base layer and have an independent private space. At Grade 1 authority, things start to get amazing. Not only will there be more items available for purchase, but you can also participate in the Green God Company's contribution competition, which takes place every 3 months. So long as you rank within the competition's top 3, you'll receive permission to live in the middle layer for 3 months. You've already seen the benefits available in the base layer. Well, the middle layer's benefits are even more exaggerated. Anyone who visits the middle layer once wouldn't wish to leave. Just like your current self, after tasting the base layer's benefits, you wouldn't want to live in the outside world anymore. Moreover, you can purchase items beyond your imagination in the middle layer. According to rumors, the Green God Company's life water can be bought there. Life water is much stronger than life potion. Supposedly, it can perfectly repair any damage to the body and even increase a person's lifespan. At this point, Kurue shook her head and sighed helplessly. For people living in the upper zone's base layer, their yearning for the middle layer was akin to the yearning outsiders had for the upper zone. However, let alone ascending to the middle layer, just gaining Grade 1 authority was already a challenge for most people. Life water? Shi Feng couldn't help being shocked. He never thought that there would be something even more potent than life potion. Moreover, it was something that could perfectly heal all injuries. If that's true, healing Gentle Snow's and Aqua Rose's mental injuries shouldn't be a problem. How do I participate in this contribution competition? Shi Feng asked Kurue. Initially, he only guessed that the upper zone would have a way to heal Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose. He hadn't been confident before. Now that he knew there was a way to do so, what he needed to do next was simple. You want to take part in it? Kurue was stunned by Shi Feng's question. Do you know what kind of people participate in that competition? What? Shi Feng asked curiously. Almost every one of them is the heir of a major corporation. Moreover, they are the best among their generation, Kurue said slowly. You can't even begin to imagine the resources they have at their command. Currently, you don't even have the 1 million trade points required to purchase an ordinary house in the base layer, let alone obtaining the Green God Company's contribution points. At Grade 1 authority, you can exchange up to 1,000 trade points per day for 10,000 credits per point. You can also find work in the upper zone or complete tasks to earn trade points and minimal contribution points. Do you know how difficult it is to earn the Green God Company's contribution points? That's not something that can be bought with money. You have to trade rare resources or help the Green God Company discover exceptional talents to obtain these points. It's impossible for you. Shi Feng had a headache when he heard Kurue's explanation. He never thought that the competition's difficulty would be so high. For the current Zero Wing, securing rare resources in the real world was simply a dream. As for helping the Green God Company discover talents, that was most likely even more difficult than securing rare resources. Wait, no. It's not absolutely impossible, Kurue said after something occurred to her. Recently, the Green God Company suddenly began purchasing God's Domain's 7 luminaries crystals in bulk. Moreover, they're offering lucrative exchange rates. 1 unit of 7 luminaries crystal can be exchanged for 1,000 trade points and 10 contribution points. However, for the current Zero Wing, ranking in the competition is still a pipe dream. The current competition has been going on for nearly a month already. The last place participant has accumulated 16,000 contribution points, while the first place participant has accumulated 110,000 points. Even if you sold Zero Wing now, you still wouldn't have enough 7 luminaries crystals to rank within the top 3. No wonder so many corporations suddenly decided to enter God's domain. So, they did it for the 7 luminaries crystals? Shi Feng suddenly had an epiphany and inwardly celebrated this discovery. For the various major corporations, money wasn't a problem. However, money wasn't enough to enter the upper zone's middle layer. Various rare resources were necessary. Meanwhile, God's Domain's 7 luminaries crystals were undoubtedly easier to obtain than the various rare resources the Green God Company required. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Upon seeing that Shi Feng still hadn't given up, Kurue shook her head and pointed at the 100-story building nearby, then said, "If you are intent on participating, you can register there. The staff at the registration area will tell you how exactly you can acquire contribution points." Shi Feng nodded in response, a plan having formed in his mind already. If it were any other item, he would indeed have difficulty fulfilling the Green God Company's requirement. However, 7 luminaries crystal was a different story. While acquiring 7 luminaries crystals wouldn't be easy for him, he wasn't exactly without options. Afterward, Shi Feng followed Kurue into the Green God Company's office building in the base layer. The Green God Company's building had very few people inside. Even after arriving in the second-floor registration area, Shi Feng had come across only 2 other people. One of them was a 26-year-old beauty, while the other was Hong Xinyuan. From the humble way Hong Xinyuan was conversing with the woman, it was evident she held a higher position than Hong Xinyuan. Hong Xinyuan's eyes even carried a hint of respect as he looked at her. "Kurue, you're finally here." Hong Xinyuan breathed out a sigh of relief when he saw Kurue and Shi Feng enter the registration area. He then asked strangely, "Where's Muxin? Didn't she come with you?" You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.